the minutes of December 20th, 2018. Did everyone get a copy of the minutes? Yes. And have you had an opportunity to review those? All right, I would entertain a motion on the minutes.
So moved.
Second? Thank you. Approval of the minutes has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or are there any amendments to the minutes?
So there were changes to the minutes, is that correct?
I submitted them to you, and then I revised them and submitted them again, yes.
No, but
And do you know what one, where the revisions are, so that way we know what was the original minutes and what was revised?
I didn't give you track changes.
Okay.
I don't think I left the first ones in there, I could go find them.
Okay.
But Joel asked me to make some changes, to be more explicit in the motions he made, even though they were withdrawn. And Joel, what else was it, do you recall?
There's a lot. There are about three major areas. I'm not sure, just as a procedural matter, I'm not sure it matters, Mark, because the minutes that are posted online are the ones you're being asked to approve. And the changes came about because what I asked of Laura was substantial. And we both thought that because she, I think, agreed entirely with the minutes as she changed them, that it would take an inordinate amount of time at this meeting if we were to go through the changes one by one. But, that said, I'm unfamiliar sitting here with the originals, but
if I understand,
what I wanted to accomplish was to make sure that every motion made was acknowledged, irrespective of whether it passed, failed, or was withdrawn, because that's what I think the law requires of meeting minutes.
But don't we do that at a
Actually,
board meeting?
yeah, maybe I could take an opportunity to provide some clarifying
Well, Laura, we
information.
will. It's gonna take an inordinate amount
Yeah.
of time. Okay.
Open meeting law and guidance for meeting, best practice for meetings per Robert's rules and other sources indicates that the best practice for meeting minutes is that they identify the nature of the content discussed and any actions taken or decisions made. They should not be a restatement or a retelling or a transcript of a meeting's discussions. Some resources say that they should record what is done, not what is said. It is important to identify key points of discussion, but putting something on the record is a privilege of the body, not a privilege of an individual. And reports and personal opinions.
That's not what happened.
I'm not, can I finish, Joel, please?
Oh, I thought-
Sorry. Reports and personal opinions aren't necessarily appropriate for the minutes, and we have had a couple of times where we've had attachments to the minutes, but best practice suggests that that's not the case. So I just wanted to take a moment to emphasize those best practice considerations and ask that we as a board aspire to best practice with regard to meeting operations and documenting our deliberations in meetings in the minutes, and be clear that amendments to the content of minutes should happen with discussion of the full board at a meeting. And the not wanting to take a lot of time is exactly why minutes should not be a retelling of the discussion, so that we don't have to get bogged down by who said what exactly how, and can emphasize the nature of the content, the key points discussed, and then the decisions made and actions taken.
All right. Now, I made that point when I met with Laura, and the entire first page of the minutes is taken up with characterizing the words and thoughts of the commissioner and not to any action on it. And I sat there and said, that's fine with me, but it seems inappropriate for the minutes of the meeting. I didn't do anything here but suggest changes based on action taken by the board. And that included the fact that a motion was made and subsequently withdrawn, as opposed to no motion was made and therefore nothing happened. So I'm not quite sure what you were responding to other than that. Laura and I guess, take part responsibility for, I guess, deciding that Laura would amend her own draft of the minutes for the board before we got into a lengthy discussion of each and every item that's now in the proposed minutes.
So
I understand the issue.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yep. And then, Robert, I'll come to you.
What is the source, the initial source for writing the minutes for the meeting? Is there a taped, or is it sort of stenography?
There'll be a tape now to help me out right here, but there has just been my taking of the minutes. I inherited the job from somebody who inherited the job from somebody.
Robert?
I was just gonna interject, be that as may, if perhaps to move things forward, if we could agree that as a general principle, if there are going to be changes to the minutes, though I think Joel's point is well taken, we wanna be mindful of our time, and I don't wanna be, I would never argue against someone who wants to save me time in a meeting. But I would say going forward, and as a person who you can tell may have organizational issues, I could easily get confused. And so I can only ask on my own behalf, and so I don't deforest all of Brazil over the course of my tenure here. If we're going to make changes to the minutes, if we could do it in that way. But again, I appreciate the sentiment, and I thank you. But I think to move it forward, if we could just be on the same page on that general point, I'd feel better.
I guess I'm wondering if, Tracy, you should ask for a motion to amend the minutes by deleting most of page 2, which consists of precisely the kinds of stuff you suggested that belong in the minutes from the commissioner. I don't care.
You can make the motion.
Well, I'm just asking you if you think that material is proper for the minutes, based on what you said.
That's a decision for the body to make, not for me personally.
But I'm asking you your
But I
opinion.
do, my personal opinion is that the key points raised by the commissioner, which were intended to be instructive and orientative for members of the board, are relevant to include in the minutes.
Which is
But
inconsistent
again-
with what you said a minute ago.
No, I
That's
didn't.
all right.
Joel, it's not inconsistent. I said that key points of the discussion ought to be captured in the minutes. That's what best practice provides.
Okay. Laura, I'm sorry that it came to this. I'm not just, if people would like, I'll review each of the changes.
I don't, yeah, again, I
And again,
appreciate what you
Robert,
said.
I understand, I've been on the receiving end of changing documents, but the original document wasn't a document, it was a draft document, as it in its own way.
So some clarity on process would be helpful. The typical process is that draft minutes are prepared and disseminated, and if there are amendments to the draft documents, they're reviewed by the board at the following meeting when we prepare, or when we approve the draft documents. And that too is part of the best practice, and I hope that we can attend to that, that's all.
Where might I find the best practice reference you're talking about?
There's guidance from the Vermont School Boards Association, the National School Boards Association. I pulled off some quick guidance in the minutes from
Well, if you want
a parliamentary resource on open meetings for Robert's rules. And if you'd like, if the board would like some more training and support with regard to open meeting, not just minutes, but other procedures for open meeting, we could talk about adding that to our work plan. I do wonder if that would be helpful, since at some point, and we'll get to that later on the agenda as we get to a work plan, several of us are new to this board and perhaps spend less time in open meeting law world as compared to where I do. So we can certainly work on that.
Can I just offer a suggestion or a review of practice? In the past, anytime there was like a typo or somebody's name was spelt wrong or a motion was made by somebody and it was referenced the wrong person, those kinds of changes were sufficient. But if it's adding a motion that was not reported on the minutes, that I feel should be done at the board meeting level. That's just my opinion.
If I may, I'm not suggesting there's anything nefarious here, and I appreciate the spirit you did this in.
Right.
But I, as
Sitting here
one,
with a clear conscience and
Yeah,
we thought
I
we were
just-
doing good by the board.
as one who is frequently overwhelms himself with multiple copies and versions, I think this would just help me in a very marginal way, so.
So we do have a motion on the table for the second version of draft minutes that we received. Are there any amendments to those minutes?
And just to be clear, the way that the minutes are written, there are multiple attachments that will go into the PDF on the approved minutes on the website. They're not all in your packet because it just seemed overwhelming and you had seen them all before. But technically, these minutes, when you approve them, are approving all those attachments as well, and they all get put up on the web. They're up there now.
Because these minutes reference attachments.
Yes, but they're explicitly referenced in there.
I do have a
Amendment?
suggested amendment,
Sure.
word is one word.
What page are you on?
It's, well, page 3, but it also extends to wherever the decision-making bylaw issue is. It's the third paragraph on page 3. The original wording, and I don't care, it works this way too, was the act of majorities, as opposed to the majorities.
Okay. I'm not reading this, sorry.
Page 3 of the
The
minute,
act of,
Joel Cook made a motion.
the act of majorities, not the majorities?
Small difference, but
Yeah.
that was the wording that I proposed, without the word.
Can you explain why that's, I'm just curious,
Actually,
why that matters? What's the
Because that was the
nuance?
motion I made. I mean, among other reasons, that was the proper wording of the motion. I don't think ultimately it makes any
There's no
substantive
content difference?
No, I don't
Okay.
think the way you interpret it.
So if I'll change that if the board wants to change that as a typo. Or however you wanna do it.
And truly,
Is there-
not a big deal.
And
I did it in the bylaws too, you didn't catch me improving. I'll change it there too if it gets
Is it?
changed in
I
the
know.
minutes. It does change the context, doesn't it?
The act of majorities of the two groups, or the act of the majorities of each
Yeah,
group.
I think for me, the word "the" implies that there's a specific form of majority within each group, and it's just, it could be two of any of the three.
You're correct, is that the document you wrote did not have the word "the."
All right.
And so that was not my intent to change what you wrote.
any objection to that amendment from anyone? Any other amendments? Seeing here none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, thank you, you've approved the minutes. And we've all discussed minute processes and can consider revisiting that in the work plan later this afternoon if desired. The next item is an overview of information regarding the statuses of and processes for the I-90-1 rules. the bylaws, articles of incorporation, membership agreements, and operational plan and policies. This is mine to do, and I felt that this was important because I felt like sometimes our discussions last time were confused by a lack of clarity about where we are in the updates to those processes and the order of operations or the interface between those processes. And I thought that clarity might help us to have a common understanding of that as we're going forward with the work of today and the work into the future. So the I-90-1 rules are promulgated as a requirement of the law. For me, the parallel is the Vermont State Board of Education rules. That might be a context that some of us as educators are familiar with. The law says what we need to have rules about, and then the rules are created through a process that's prescribed as well, and that those rules set a framework for all of the other pieces of, in a school's case, policy and procedure, and in this organization's place, the articles of incorporation, bylaws, and all of those pieces. I checked on with DFR and with Laura's support the specific processes and timelines for that in December, no, in early January, sometime several weeks ago. And the update is that the process for I-90-1 amendments may be beginning formally around now. At the time, it was December 21st, they said they expected to file a first draft of the rules 2 to 3 weeks from that point. So they may have been filed by this point, they may not. The rulemaking process includes a formal filing, a period of public comment on the rules, and a hearing, and then ultimately that leads to a final filing. And that approval process typically takes 3 to 4 months, is what they said.
My experience is it typically takes about 8 months, but we'll find out.
Yeah, it could take longer, you're right, but hopefully these rules aren't controversial and are more administrative to align with the changes in law from Act 11, but you're right, it could be longer. Our documents, the bylaws, articles of incorporation, membership agreements, and the operational plan, as well as our procedures, need to be amended to comply with the rules. And we have the opportunity over the next several months to prepare those amendments based on what we expect those final rules to be. And I don't foresee personally anything sideways, coming up sideways in the rulemaking process that would significantly impact our ability to plan or prepare. I know that there are some rulemaking processes where I wouldn't start working because you really aren't sure where the rulemaking process is gonna go or how testimony might affect it in the hearing process, but I don't feel that for this. So, and DFR has let us know that there's nothing in regulation or law that tells us what the process or timeline ought to be, so I feel that we are welcome to begin to work on updates to the bylaws, articles of incorporation, the membership agreements, and the operational plans. All of those things, those 4 things, need to be filed with DFR and approved. I would imagine they would not approve those until the rules are completed. And what they've told us is they would prefer all of those amendments to come as one. They are open to receiving a completed packet prior to their finalization of rules, but again, we might not hear back that those approved items are approved until the rulemaking process is complete. As far as policy goes, policy needs to be developed and updated consistent with all of the above. DFR must approve changes to the investment policy. And the DFR should be updated on policies that they have recommended that we have as a part of their organizational audit. The code of conduct, the conflict of interest policy, and the net position policy. So they don't approve those, but we should file those with DFR if we make changes, or in the case of the net position policy, which we have not adopted yet, we should file that with DFR. They won't approve it, but they need to know we have it, especially net position, since they said in their last audit, we need to have one. So much like school district operations, there's this hierarchy of law, rules, organizational documents, and policy documents. And we need to navigate the timing of all of those pieces together. Laura, I don't know if you've gotten an update as to whether or not the I-90-1 amendments have been filed yet.
The rule changes?
Yes.
No, I was told that we would be told when they were seeking their comment period, but I haven't heard anything.
So more to come. That will take months. And in the meantime, we need to plan for that alignment and convergence of changes at all levels. If that makes sense. Any questions about that? Not that I can necessarily answer all of them. DFR does see Laura as somebody who's very knowledgeable and reliable and an expert in those things, so if you do have questions, that Laura might be better to answer those.
A question.
Yeah.
And I don't think it should change how we approach the next item, but it does seem out of sequence to adopt changes that we purport to want to have be consistent with the change in the regulation before seeing a change in the regulation. So my recommendation would be that we act, we take the action called for in item 6 with the proviso that we may have to revisit it in case the rule ends up somehow making what we do inconsistent.
Yeah, I wonder if we're gonna need to make some tentative decisions, much like you do when negotiating.
Yeah, I guess.
And you ratify pieces tentatively pending a complete package.
Purely thinking out loud, I think we should just go ahead and act finally, but all of us knowing that when the rule is finalized, one of us, someone here, should review what the action we take to make sure that that other changes aren't needed, that's all.
Yeah.
I suspect they won't be.
I suspect as well, but I think, I agree, and I think it should be a full board duty to look over our final package of amendments or proposed amendments, and together make sure it's aligned and ready to submit after we've probably over the course of a number of meetings gone through a number of pieces of updates to all of the components that guide the operations of the organization. Robert?
I agree with everything I've heard, but the final piece, which is to compare whatever we decide to do with the legislation and decide it's in conformity, wouldn't that be the role of our legal counsel, or, I mean, we could look at,
Yeah.
one would think that that would be their role, am I right?
We might want to get legal review on pieces, yes.
We'll have, as soon as they have draft rules, we'll have a really good idea, right? You know, and then there'll be a comment process and adoption process, but we'll have time during that whole draft process to see if there's anything that raises issues.
And along, I think we're behaving consistently with the way we ought to behave. To the extent that the draft rule is inconsistent with action we take today, that might inform our comments on the draft rule.
That's true.
Yeah. So any other questions about that? Helpful, I hope, a little bit.
Yeah, very helpful, actually.
Okay, so we want to take a look at Articles of incorporation, bylaws, membership agreements, and operational plan. Laura, would you like to introduce this item?
Sure, so when Act 11 passed in the summer, the original signal from DFR was that everything would be amended prior to October 1st. They've since realized that the rules need to come first, as we just discussed, but that was sort of the out of the gate messaging. So I worked with legal counsel, incorporated the Vermont NEA as in Jeff Fannin and VSBA as in Nicole Mace, and DFR to sort of take a shot at what the amendments might look like, because at least on its face, Act 11 is pretty clear about how it's changed our board, so it seems like you go in and you just align that, all the documents to that. So I had done quite a bit of work, but the board ended up tabling them, waiting for both the new board to get seated and for the rules. My understanding from Joel is that as a new board member, not being aware of the work I did, I know he did extensive work also, and when our board meeting got delayed earlier in the month, we decided to use the time to sort of reconcile our two versions and see if we could bring you one set of documents that we both felt complied with Act 11. We succeeded in that. So we present them to you. That doesn't mean that you won't have questions or other changes. We are limiting only to things to do with Act 11. You may have other bylaw changes you want to take up over the next meeting or months, but that wasn't our jurisdiction. I will tell you one thing that I did make a comment on in the bylaws. So obviously I didn't type Joel's motion on how to make decisions, because I had the in there that you just took out of the minutes in majority, so I'll fix that in the next version. But while, so that is on manner of acting, it's on page 5 of the bylaws, which is the one that is small, because it has the comment, so if you're looking for all your documents.
Yep.
On page 5 of 12 of the bylaws, and you need to change, so it's the act of majorities, to be consistent with what you just decided to the minutes and with Joel's actual written motion. The other thing I wanted to point out, which was where my comment was, is that instead of taking the actual motion about a quorum, which came from Elizabeth's document that she gave in writing, and is in the minutes as Elizabeth wrote, at least that was the intent, Joel and I agreed that there might be some cleaner wording, so the bylaws quorum in the middle of page 5 is our suggestion. We think it captures the spirit of what Elizabeth made as a motion and you approved. You don't think so? I want it to be really transparent. That's one place where we did some wordsmithing.
Do you have that written wording handy?
Of
I know
what
I have it, but
It's in the minutes.
I know, but I,
So yes, Elizabeth's motion was, I'll read it and you can look at the bylaws, how's that, you ready?
yeah.
A quorum for the transaction of business at any meeting of the VEHI board shall consist of at least 2 board members appointed by the Vermont School Boards Association and at least 2 board members appointed by the Vermont National Education Association. If less than 2 board members representing either party are present at any given meeting, those members in attendance will adjourn the meeting immediately without further notice and without taking up any business. The feeling was some of the words weren't necessary. If you adjourn, you're not taking up business, and some of the other words, I can read it again if you want. Like, we didn't have to mention VEHI board because it's VEHI's bylaws, so it seems kind of silly to mention which board it was, because you're talking about the directors of VEHI as a given. Again, I don't have any strong feelings about it, but it seemed to make sense as Joel and I worked through it. So other than that, again, we know there's no rush for you to act. We hoped that we gave you enough time to read these, that you have the potential of acting today if you feel it's straightforward. You don't have to adopt them in a block, you could take one at a time. that's completes my introduction, Joel, I don't know if you wanted to
Yeah,
add
that's
anything.
fine, thanks.
I had some questions, could I ask questions? Well, on page 3 of 12
Of the bylaws,
of the bylaw, the very bottom,
yeah.
my copy, I just
Yeah,
can't read
it's
that.
all,
Isn't it weird?
it's all
Yeah.
rewritten.
I don't know what
Hey,
it
no,
says
no
and whether I
spacing
like
either.
it.
Right.
Why, as stated in the Articles of Incorporation, members of the corporation shall be entitled to vote only for the election of directors thereof, and to approve certain amendments to the bylaws and articles of incorporation.
And the amendment is to delete the,
Right, they're not allowed to elect the director, they can't vote
For the
for the
election
election
of
of the directors thereof and, because Act 11 changed that. Sorry.
Shall be entitled to vote only,
For the election of directors thereof.
no, that's the part that's crossed out,
Right,
the good part.
only to approve certain amendments to the bylaws and articles of incorporation. So-
Are any of the amendments proposed here amendments that need to be approved by the,
No, so the way that the bylaws existed before Act 11 was that the membership only votes around directors, the number of directors, the term of directors, the election of directors, anything director related. So if you wanted to change bylaws that had anything to do with directors before Act 11, you had to get a vote of the membership as well as the board being engaged. You could change every other section of the bylaws, the board, without the membership. So that's how it stood. With Act 11, you can change any article of the bylaws still, except directors. Directors now, you don't have discretion to change because they're by law, the members don't have discretion to vote on. What was interesting though, and took actually some time to think through, is that if you look in the Articles of Amendment, Articles of Incorporation, which is at least a bigger document, right, it's the first of the documents.
Articles of Incorporation.
Articles of Incorporation actually says Articles of Amendment, because you're amending the whole Articles of Incorporation. All the articles aren't there,
Okay.
just the ones we're gonna change.
Okay.
So at the bottom, to amend Article 7 as follows, you can see the words that are struck, and what we didn't strike was the word terms of office. Are you with me?
No.
So you're striking, the members can no longer elect directors, they can't approve amendments to the bylaws related to the number of directors, the composition of the board, but they still can vote on the term of office, because Act 11 did
Didn't
not
talk about term.
speak to it. And DFR said that because they didn't speak to it, but they spoke in the same law to terms of the commission, that DFR's perspective is that right still goes to the members. Now,
with
so
a
I'll give
caveat.
you, so here's the interesting thing, okay, there's two sort of things to think about. So that you have no authority to strike that phrase, term of director, because Act 11 didn't require you to. And if you wanted to do it, you'd have to go to the members, because you're changing their rights. It's kind of nice that it's in there, because if you didn't do that, it would be less clear whether members have any voting rights. Now we can at least point to one voting right they have. They actually exercised it in 2016 and changed the terms from 6 years to 3. So on the face of it, you all hold 3-year terms that came into effect on October 1st. However, you are appointed, not elected directors, and if you go into nonprofit law, which I have somewhere in my vast pile, the citation, appointed directors can be removed and replaced by their appointing association that's the starting point in law, unless the bylaws or the articles say differently. And your bylaws or articles don't say differently. So at some point, you may want to have a discussion, I don't think you need to have it today, on whether you want 3-year terms that almost have no meaning, because if tomorrow the VSBA decided that they didn't like Martha for some reason, you know, we all know that they could behind the scenes try to twist your arm to resign, right? But if they wanted you to leave and you didn't want to, under Vermont law right now, they have a right to take you out and reappoint you.
Mhm.
Whereas if you change that, and I think you'd have to get the members involved, because it has to do with the board, to say that, no, they have a 3-year term and the appointing association can't, which is what the commission did, right? You know, so that once you make that appointment, if you don't like an organization, you have to wait for their 3-year term to be up. You have the right to think about that, but that's outside of Act 11.
Yeah.
The other thing you might wanna think about that's outside of Act 11 is, Act 11 reset all of your terms on the same date.
Well, that's what
Do
I
you
was
really
thinking.
want
Yeah.
the whole board to be
Right.
overturned
Turning
all at
over.
once? So you may wanna think about staggering. And again, we have to think that through, we probably need some legal help,
Yeah,
because
I
it
would
probably
say we
involves
need
members.
legal opinion on that.
But I don't think it's an immediate need, and it probably, we have that in a parking lot
Mhm.
list,
Is that on the work plan,
not yet,
It is
Alright.
now.
help me remember it.
but it's
Work
on my
plan.
sort of note. So that's why you will still see in the bylaws that they have a right to approve certain amendments, because they have a right to approve amendments to term. And we think you probably
And if we
wanna
wanted to
address
do
that.
something about that, the next natural time to do that is next October.
Yes.
The annual meeting.
Right. So think about what you as a board want to do, see if you can come to a consensus, and then bring it to the members and see if they would agree with it.
Yep.
And you really wanna get that done, honestly, you should have it done by the end of August, because they need to be notified of what's on the agenda. And we have a certain time period, how much notice you have to give for the annual meeting, you know, not less than this many days, not more than that many days,
So that'll
which is
go on
in
the-
September,
So that'll go on the work plan early.
so you should work on that. Again, you don't have to do it by the first annual meeting, but unless you're calling a second meeting, if you don't do it this October, you're kicking it off another year.
Between 10 and 50 days before the meeting.
Is
The
it
notice
read the
required
bylaw?
it is. Hmm?
I think it's 10 and 45, but
So,
are you reading
Anyhow,
it right from the
you know,
bylaws? Yeah.
we can wait until
Yeah, you can.
mid-September if we really want to.
You
That's
can.
all right. Or late September.
You know, the other thing that, so we inserted the quorum and the manner of acting amendments that you already approved at the last meeting. I already noted that we wordsmithed the quorum a little bit, and again, you need to be comfortable with that language. On committees, which is on page 7 of 12 of the bylaws, we felt that to be consistent with the spirit of the bylaws, that a committee could have up to 3 directors, because it is, every conversation we've ever had around bylaws is the reason you limited a committee to no more than 2 directors on a board of 5 was so you wouldn't have a quorum of the board. So now technically you could go up to 3 and not have a quorum of the board. And you don't have to have any board of directors on your committee, and you could have any number up to 3. It doesn't mean you have to have 3. It just gives you more flexibility, and we thought that that kept the spirit of what that
A
was.
committee of the board, just to add clarity, however,
Right.
is still subject to all the open meeting laws, including noticing meetings and taking minutes and all of those things. So it doesn't necessarily expedite a decision-making process, except that perhaps there might be fewer people present,
Right.
Well, and it's clear that the committee doesn't have authority to act as a board.
or has,
Yeah,
They might have to act in open session. But, so, you know, the 2 to 3, it's not like Act 11 said you have to change that, but we thought that that was consistent. Jill, did I miss something?
I don't understand what just happened. A committee, which by definition is not a quorum of the board,
Mhm.
can talk among themselves with it. Let's not go there today. The proposed amendment is merely to avoid, not to avoid, but to recognize that the quorum is now larger.
Right.
So forget the niceties for them.
But if it's a board committee, then you do have to follow the open meeting law.
You have to follow the open meeting law. The question is, at what point do the provisions of the open meeting law require certain action? That's all. We don't know.
Perhaps we should talk more
Yeah.
about committee operations if we ever
Right.
choose to appoint one, because it sounds like there's some questions about that.
Yeah.
My point was the size of the quorum.
Mhm.
The size of the committee doesn't matter, because they're still subject to open meeting law. They would be constrained to the charge that the committee is given, and would have the obligation to report back to the board, but want to be clear that a committee still has to warn their meetings, take minutes, stick to their charge, report back to the board.
Let's leave that as an open question. When we have a committee.
Yeah, you may never have a committee, but.
The other thing to be aware of is that DFR expected that when you made your intended changes, but before they're submitted to DFR, that they're posted online and the members are made aware of them. Give them a chance to, I think, perhaps complain to you or try to influence your petition. But more importantly, I think from DFR's perspective, they could decide whether or not they want to remain members, right? Because it's a voluntary thing, it takes time, you have to give notice to leave. I'm not saying people want to leave, but DFR wanted to make sure that members saw these changes explicitly in a track changes version and were formally notified, so they had the opportunity to interact with the board or reconsider their membership. So that, we also have plenty of time to do that because we're waiting for the rules, so we can post that, and that also means before you finally submit them to DFR, not only will you get to see their rules, but you'll see whether there's any.
So once the rules have been
Questions?
published, and we've gone through and made what we think makes sense to make these changes, then we publish that out to the
I
members,
wouldn't
give
even wait
them
for
the
the rules
time.
to be published, I would just put it out as soon as you act on it. Say the board has acted, they've not filed with DFR, you don't have to write it sort of what's going on, give people plenty of time to look at it.
That's on the premise that nothing in the rules will
Yeah, and we-
change what we're
yeah.
doing.
Robert?
It was just to pick up on that point, however. So if we publish this for our members, what is considered an adequate amount of time?
Mm.
Did they tell you? Is it
No.
a week or?
But they have they have to give us 90 days notice to leave. No, they didn't. I did query with DFR about what requires adequate notice, sort of how to give them notice, and also was DFR gonna make us require everybody to sign new member agreements, because we're changing their member agreements. And basically, I brought it up to try to avert, is that the right word, us having to send out new member agreements. We had to do that in 2013. Tracking down 500 member agreements is a very tedious and laborious process. So we wanted to avoid it. So I suggested an alternative to DFR, and they felt that it was totally within our purview to decide, which is we would send a broad communication through our normal communication channels to school board members, superintendents, business managers, that these changes are required by Act 11, and here's copies of them, and here's how you can influence the board, and your membership is voluntary, and here's what it means. But we would also send a certified return receipt letter to each superintendent's office, because that's better than a board chair's home. And for those where we don't get the return receipt to show that it's been received, we do follow up. And DFR thought that that would be a sufficient approach.
And that you wouldn't be also requesting them to sign off on a new
Right, they don't
membership
have to,
agreement.
it does not require any action. We would put all these return receipts and a copy of the certified letter in everybody's membership folder,
Mhm.
so that we would have a record, you were
You're
notified.
notified.
Forgive the metaphor, it's like being served with court
Yeah.
paper.
Yes, yes. But we would do a broad, we would really try to communicate it at VASBO and at
Yeah.
superintendents. We can ask Tracy to talk to the Superintendent's Association, and we could ask, we don't have a school board member now, but we'll ask VSBA to get it out to their membership. So, but we'll also have a formal record trail. know it's a lot to digest, so.
So the changes to the membership agreements are solely to delete reference to voting for directors.
Yep, and then renumber after that, yep. And then the operational plan, which I think is earlier. At the very beginning of the operational plan, it outlines the board, so we had to change that. And if you notice two colors ink, it's only because sometimes I work from my home computer and sometimes I work from my work computer and it thinks I'm two different people. You know that? I once got a track changes from Mark that said Susan made the comments, and I'm like, who the heck is Susan? And then I realized that's the name of his wife, and he was working from home. And the computer has her as the person, not you, your wife's computer. So anyway, it has no
Oh,
meaning
so the
other
red
than
and
that.
blue don't mean anything?
It just means I
Okay.
was Homer at work.
Secret
Okay.
VEHI code, young lady.
I'm like, why is there?
The marketing on the operational plan, page 4, is not a result of Act 11, but it needs to be addressed because we hired Bobby Joe. So we have to speak, we had to do one of two things, and we actually talked about this with the old board, but we'll talk about it again with this board. I don't know what the thinking was in 2013, but in 2013, when we listed the marketing people, we listed ourselves personally, Joe Zimmerman, Laura Soares Marcage, and when Joe Zimmerman retired, we amended it and took him out. So we either need to add Bobby Joe in by name, which we could do, but it seemed like we should do titles and make it unnecessary to have to do
Yeah.
it. So that's what we
Absolutely.
did. Mark, Bobby Joe, and I, doesn't mean we can't look at it again, but we looked at it a couple times, and the three of us wrote that, so it has to be, really has to be done.
Are there other questions about the, proposed amendments? I have some thoughts, but I don't know if the people are ready. I'm watching you turn, so I'll let you turn the pages for a minute and make sure, yeah.
This is just, it's a typographical issue. On the Vermont, the health, the Articles of Amendment, where it lists the 6 of us. See one page that says to have a 6?
It doesn't list the 6 of you, it lists the
Oh.
7 that.
That was the
So that was a
But-
really
but-
weird,
no,
That's
here,
not a
but-
question, second page.
oh, when
Oh,
you
so it's a
signed it,
2.
yes.
Yeah, where the signature go?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my name is ES, not IS.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Male, female.
Now I have to search everything and find it, I apologize. As someone who's named Laura, who a lot of times people will say Laurie or change it,
Yes.
I should have been more sensitive, I'm sorry.
It's okay, trust me.
I'm not the first.
And you won't be the last. I can't wait for me.
Does it matter if it's Peggy, if I'm legally Margaret?
You know,
I signed Peggy for
whatever
a lot of
name you would
things.
like, if you
Peggy
have a
works out.
legal
Just
way of
wanted to make sure.
signing it,
When she said that, I thought, oh shoot, no, Peggy's good for me.
you get to
What is
decide
it?
how to put your name down, so I will change it. Somebody wants a middle initial, if I've spelled it wrong, certainly. Okay. Oh, I don't know if I have it anywhere else, because I call you Fran, that might be the first time. Oh, no, it's a couple
I
places.
think I did that once too, I apologize.
And I did alphabetical order.
So I have two thoughts that I'll share and see if other people have thoughts in general. And my first thought is that, I think there may be other work on today's agenda that could potentially influence the bylaws as we're moving forward. So, would like for us to be really thoughtful about how we want to, move forward as we may be approving changes over a series of multiple meetings potentially. Having worked with some level of detail on the agenda and being eager to talk about the work of the board, and start to plan timing for that ongoing work and where any of that might circle back to the bylaws. So, that's one of my comments, is let's talk about process for finalizing or tentatively finalizing these decisions, subject to a final ratification of a total package, perhaps after potentially more changes and a feedback process from our members. Two, I want to talk a little bit about process and apologize, but also clarify. Laura did let me know that she was gonna meet with Joel at the time of our last meeting, which I had to cancel, and I apologize and thank you for your understanding. It is common for an executive officer of an organization to meet with individual board members to educate, inform, engage, have conversations. But I do, and I recognize the importance of that and do that with my own board members in my role as superintendent, because sometimes things aren't appropriate for a full board discussion, especially when you have new members to the board. But I think when it comes to doing the work of the board in the future, it would be important for the board to authorize a designee to do that work if that's necessary or appropriate. And not necessarily spontaneous, as that's just an important board governance practice, particularly when it comes to work that is ultimately the responsibility of the board.
I want to respond.
Okay.
You're suggesting there was something wrong. My understanding is you authorized the meeting. It didn't just happen spontaneously.
As I said in the
Right.
beginning, I understood that you were meeting. I
You
did not,
authorized it.
I did not,
I basically, you and I were on the phone, we were on the phone talking about changes to minutes when Tracy's email came through, that she couldn't make the meeting. And I'm the one that said, hey Joel, why don't we still meet and use that time to go through these things? And you said, sounds like a committee, we don't have authority to do a committee. And I said, let me work with Tracy. And then I said, Tracy, you're pushing the meeting. I think Joel and I can really help the board move forward by spending to this. And she didn't say no. But that's kind of different from
I
authorizing.
apologize, as board chair.
I took the
To be blunt, I
reins.
think it's the equivalent of authorization.
So to be clear, as board chair, I don't have the authorization to delegate someone to do the work of the board on behalf of the board, and I apologize if it appeared that I did that. I do
I
want to,
just, my resentment,
please
that's
don't,
what it
I'm
is.
still talking, I'm still talking, Joel,
But it's the
please,
third time you've
please don't
suggested that
interrupt.
we did the work of the board, when in fact, it was obvious that I was following up with Laura at, I think, her suggestion to clarify the stuff that I had prepared for this group last fall. That's different. I didn't do the work of the board with Laura.
The agenda that I have says that there are joint recommendations from Joel and Laura Suarez. That to me feels like work of the board. And again,
Exactly, it's the work of
you're
Laura and
interrupting
Joel.
a fourth time, Joel, please, let me finish.
It's the fourth time you've said
Joel,
something
I'm
wrong.
still talking. You can share your piece after I'm done speaking.
Okay.
I
I will share
apologize.
my feedback.
Yeah, please, I want to give you every opportunity. I want a chance to share mine as well. And so I will apologize again if my awareness that an individual board member was meeting with an administrator from the body appeared to be consent to do what I think was the work of the board. That was not my intent. I do think it's very important and helpful, particularly when individual board members are new to the board or have an area of particular expertise, knowledge, background, strength, or interest in learning more, exchanging ideas, and working with any of our trust administrators or officers to help advance their understanding and the officers' understanding of the work. However, it's important that the work of the board only be delegated to a committee or an individual by the authority of the board. So again, my intent was to apologize if I appeared to authorize that and to ask board members and our officers and administrators to be mindful of that balance.
My turn?
You may have a turn.
I didn't do the work of the board. I did the work of Joel Cook as a representative appointed by Vermont NEA, working through with Laura the stuff. When you say work of the board, the implication is that somehow I held myself out as the board. I didn't do that. And so with that clarification, I don't care what you just said, that's fine. But when you mischaracterize it 5 times sequentially, I have to respond. Thank you.
Acknowledge your response and respectfully disagree.
With
Any
that-
other comments?
with
Yeah,
that-
I'm a little concerned here.
Yeah.
That with Act 11, things have changed, the board membership has changed. We obviously have to change these bylaws so that, and how we move forward. And I think the faster and sooner we can do some of this, approving this proposed, committee, so we don't, I guess it doesn't bother me that, Joel and Laura worked on this, so that we have something that we can then be acting upon. That's when you'll get the board action, is when we actually, the 6 of us, decide whether these changes make sense or not, and would it be appropriate. It just seems to me that there seems to be, that we, for some reason, VEHI seems to be in the mud, and we have to get ourselves out of it and move forward. And that's where we need to be going. So, I'd like to just see, are there sections here that we can sort of close and say, yeah, the new wording makes sense and we can move forward with it? Are there others where we still need to do more work with? Because as you point out, there's issues about, that are on the agenda that would affect some of these.
Yeah.
So, are there things that we can sort of get off the table already and move forward with? Because if we're gonna spend our whole year at every meeting just doing all this paperwork stuff, that is so not what we're supposed to be doing, and it's just bogging us all down.
Other comments?
Yes, in response to your, I guess, I don't know what your statement was about, but my sense is that we should adopt bylaws in the sequence in which they are presented. And not, I don't think the word package is particularly relevant, because we may change 1 or more bylaws at every other meeting, and I don't know where we review and adopt them all retrospectively as a package. We have a series of bylaw proposals that Laura has taken us through. They're on the table. There are about, I guess, 3 potential bylaw changes yet to come at this very meeting, if we get that far in this meeting. I don't know that we will. So I guess I'll move the adoption of the proposed amendments to the bylaws as presented by Laura.
A second.
Is there further discussion? I know that Robert was trying to catch my attention to speak.
Just as a point, not that I think what Fran said made a lot of sense, both the first part of your statement and the second, and that clearly we have to move forward on certain things. And to use a baseball metaphor, I'm a lapsed baseball fan. I know in baseball now it's no longer the style, but base hits are good, you get some momentum. And I think Joel said this as well. I would be uncomfortable if there's a rush to approve a package, and I'm admitting it as the rookie here, that we'll be locked into things, regardless of what comes down from the DFR. So I think, I seem to have heard that we could move at a pace, albeit move, again, get some base hits, do some things, but it's not, I'm not sensing, I'm wrong to sense that there's an urgency to approve a package and then move on to other things. This isn't like changing the Constitution, but I get it, it could be cumbersome if we were to approve things that we regret and then we have to revisit. So I'm okay to say, we're dealing with everything on fire equally at once. And I'm allergic to the word package for that reason, that we could be more deliberative on some of them. Is that a fair statement? And I think that's what I heard from Fran as well, that some things we should be able to have a base hit, and others might require more deliberation and just consideration of the consequences over time. Is that a statement that we could buy into?
Can I ask a clarifying question? What was the motion? Was it for
I
the
think it-
bylaws or was it for all 4 things?
Oh, I apologize, it was limited to the bylaws, but let me amend it before it gets seconded if it does.
It did
Oh,
get
I'm
seconded.
already there, I was ready to go for the bylaws, I'm
Please
all about
let,
to make
please
sense.
let me
I'm all for
propose
basic.
to
All
amend,
5 documents.
to amend my motion so that it reads to adopt the several, is it 5?
Yes.
The 5 the proposed amendments to the 5 documents that Laura presented to us.
And Peggy, are
And
you
I
okay?
apologize for it.
Are you okay with that amendment
If
since
I
you
Can
seconded
get a
it?
clarification, the bylaws, articles of incorporation, membership agreement, and operational plan.
There's 2 membership agreements,
Thank
one's
you.
meant,
I
health,
didn't
one's
want to
dental.
agree to anything then.
No,
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. I'm fine with
Good
that.
to ask. Okay, thank you for your,
I put little sticky tabs there to try to have you see that there was a new document as you went through, but
Yeah, that's good.
It works.
So can I ask a question?
yes,
So what is stopping us from not adopting these right now and work through the rest of our agenda in case there, like we said, things that we're gonna wanna change to those now that we've already adopted them and approved them? Are we gonna have to go back and say, okay, now let's make this other change and now we're gonna have to approve them again? Can we see if maybe in our work plan, we can roll these out a little bit more systematic and say, okay, we're gonna continue reviewing, I don't know, the articles of incorporation, if there's nothing in there that looks, but put it in our work plan so that we're not just, all of a sudden, we're sitting here, we get these, I've looked through them, yes, but we haven't had a discussion as a group, other than just this last few minutes. Why do they have to be done today? Just a thought, yeah.
I really support what Fran said. I'd like to see us get something done, checked off, and moving on so that we can get to the work of the board. I feel like this is still the construction piece of the new board.
Yep.
And so, whether we do it as a package or go through item by item, I'd like to do it and then move on. We set the times with the agenda in hopes of moving us forward. I think we've gone over that at this point in time. So, I just think that's the way the agenda was constructed, that was the intent. If not, maybe you could have raised that in the beginning and said to delay it until later, but I would just like to see us address these, make a decision, nay or nay, and then go to the next one.
Paul?
I'm not sure what your process is for public comment, but as a member of the public, looking at the agenda, there's no indication of which items are up for action and which items are up for discussion. So I think it's problematic to take action on the foundational documents for the organization without putting notice on the agenda that,
item 6 does say act,
7 says determine.
act.
or number
8
6.
says determine.
So that's how it's gonna be identified on the agenda?
Fran?
10 minutes?
Question, our number 6 on the agenda, the actual min articles, right? The proposed changes that we've been looking at, I don't think, and maybe that's where I'm reading it wrong, but it doesn't look like anything we would approve here reflect number 7 or 8 on the agenda, which deal with issues of the election roles, responsibilities, or the appointment of corporate officers. Is that true?
Yeah, because Act 11 doesn't require you to change those things.
All
You
right,
may
so-
want to change those things, but we were
Right.
separating those issues.
Right, so if we vote on things that have been, because things like the quorum issue, the committee
Right,
piece,
so you
right?
made 2 decisions last meeting, we rolled those in. We added all the things we think you need to do to be compliant with Act 11. Doesn't prohibit you from making further amendments that you wish.
Right, so approving these changes would not mean that we have to go back and change them when we address 7 and 8. So it could be clean, it's like, right?
I'm wondering if you would accept a friendly amendment that it moves that the motion become a tentative adoption of the amendments as presented, pending completion of our complete review.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Because this is my own thought process, I was thinking you sort of tentatively amend, right? But you either have to amend and act, or they aren't amended,
Mhm.
right? Now, you can amend, and then that's how you will act. You will act with the quorum, which you actually sort of, already decided last time. And you'll act with all these things, with committees and with all of this, knowing that if there's something comes up that makes you want to reconsider, you will have to act to change the actions.
Right.
But you either are amending them or not, you know what I mean? You have to know how you're operating. So that's my thought.
And I just want an opportunity at the end, one, to make sure that all of our changes are aligned. And then when we get to the end, and we have all the changes we think we want to make for that comprehensive packet for submission to DFR, I think it would be important for us to reaffirm the total package. So I'm trying to manage incremental.
You can have an action item on the agenda before you submit to DFR that gives you an opportunity to make any changes before you submit to DFR.
Robert?
I hope I'm not betraying that I lost the train of thought here, but is the motion to approve the bylaws, the membership agreements, all together?
All
Yes.
5 documents.
Okay.
To approve the proposed amendments to.
Amendments,
Just the ones that
That
are
align
in
with
here,
Act
not
11.
any, doesn't preclude
Right.
you from doing other
Just the ones
things.
that we've been looking at.
Any other discussion? I'll withdraw my friendly amendment.
As long as we're all clear that this doesn't mean that we can't still make changes to these documents over the course of our work over the next year until the rules come out.
You could change them every hour.
Can I call a question?
Sure. All those in favor? Oh, you don't need to.
Okay.
I'll be informal. If people are done discussing, I'm fine. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. May I take a 3-minute?
Basic.
Only if I can have the other stall.
That's good.
This is why I stopped watching baseball, the games
Toxic
run 4
factors.
hours. I can't, 4 hours. I know people are Red Sox fans.
Well then, when are you gonna leave?
No, I mean, not this, but I said baseball, I
When's the 7th inning stretch?
Right. I can remember, I went to the very first Montreal Expos game, first major league game, first Montreal Expos game, first game played outside the United States. Back in the day, there were games that ran 2.5 hours.
Really?
The last Expos game I went to, the Red Sox were in town. It lasted 2.5 hours, was fabulous. The Red Sox had 2 hits, the Expos won. You're out of there in 2.5 hours, that's managed. 4.5 hours.
They ought to just let one team bat for 27 outs, and the other team gets up and sees it everything out there.
You wanna have a great experience, take a European who's never seen a baseball game.
Really?
Oh.
A baseball game, who's a soccer fan,
Right.
they think you're absolutely crazy.
Really? But
No,
they
there's
don't score that many more runs.
They're collecting ideas, so the journal had this, they were inviting ideas to speed it up, here's a great idea. okay? If, it's 3 outs in an inning, but if one team takes the lead, it goes down to 2 outs. And these statisticians at NYU ran the last 100 years of games, and they said if you brought in that rule, you would have saved up 40 minutes per game. Okay.
Same outcome?
Oh, good, yeah, well.
It's sort of like a variant on Little League Mercy.
That's right.
If the lead gets to be a certain number of runs, we're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one night, I was reading the Free Press mail last night. It took 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I got to the-
That's a lot.
Well,
It's cut down.
No obits to really
I
study.
carried over the sports page, and the sports page included a report on girls' basketball. And my kids went to CVU and played for CVU, so I take an interest in it. And who did they play? Oh my gosh. Essex. Now, in the day when my kids were playing, Essex and CVU were head-to-head rivals at the top of their class. And yesterday's game was like 72-27 in favor of CVU. I'm thinking that however long that game lasted, it was too long.
I used to ref Little League ball games sometimes, and I had this professional ref one day who showed up. I don't know why, he just did, so he took behind the plate for a while. And he said to me when I took over, he said, "Son, just remember you get paid for the outs." Move fast.
Move it along.
I refereed soccer, Mark, for that reason. It's a finite commitment. You knew when you were over and you could make plans.
All right, did everybody get to reload their snacks? Grab another bottle. So the next item of business is election and roles and responsibilities of board officers. And although Peggy and I didn't get to discuss this as we were designing the agenda, we added more detail than we typically do in an agenda to try and reflect that as a new board with lots of people with lots of ideas, that we're trying to arrange an agenda where voices are heard, ideas are raised, and we're not leaving that out, but we are getting towards an intentional, planful process. We're doing all of the work that we have to do before us, and we're doing that together. So there is a little more detail in this agenda than is typically the case, and maybe we won't always need that level of detail. When it comes to the election and roles and responsibilities of board officers, we've already heard previously that Joel has a proposal for how to choose chairperson and vice chairperson. Peggy raised thoughts about agenda development, which is typically the responsibility of the chair. And the other responsibility that goes with the chair is the communications protocol has some specific responsibilities for the chair. So to make sure in advance of the meeting, everybody understood that all of those pieces were on the table as we were not just talking about the election of board officers, but hopefully electing board officers, which we're supposed to do annually. That all of that was reflected and opportunity was given for those things. So with that, how about we start with inviting Joel to share his proposal.
Okay, thank you. I presented this to you all, although I don't think you all saw it for a month or so, on November 1st. So it's been more than, well, it's been fully a quarter year since I put it to my computer. And I will read one paragraph of explanation for it. I could give some local person color to it if needed. And then I'll move right into the proposal itself. The question is, how will we determine who chairs the board? And then I wrote, there is no reason absent consensus for the chair of an equally representative board to be from one segment. And then I wrote, the board has had the same single chair for 4, actually, I think it's close to 6
Seems like a
years.
lifetime.
And however long it has been, it has been since the restructuring, the original.
October 13th.
October 13th, so like 5 1/4 years or so. So This could be addressed by periodically rotating chairmanship or more simply and obviously by establishing co-chairs. I said, I believe unless the board agrees to one chair, it should elect one of the school board's representatives and one of the school employees' representatives as co-chairs. And then I followed that with a motion to change the bylaws regarding the, what it's called, number of officers. Article 4, Section 1. And do you have it, you all have it in front of you? I should probably read it. Should I read it?
Yes, please.
I will read the proposed.
Are you making it as a motion at this point, or?
I'm making it a motion.
And can, before you read, we talked about this last time, but I wanna talk about it again, just to make sure that a motion isn't a motion until it's here before the board, and information isn't received until we're here as a board considering it together, okay?
To hear at long last is the motion.
Thank you.
I move that bylaw provisions relating to the chair and vice chair be amended as follows, and there are 7. But they all flow from the notion of either we elect one, or if we can't elect one, we elect co-chairs and co-vice chairs. So Article 4, Section 1 would read, and I'll tell you when the new words are coming. It reads now, the officers of the board shall be a chair and a vice chair, each of whom shall be elected by the directors. And here's new language until I say it's old language again. New language would be, in the event the directors cannot elect one director as chair or as vice chair, they shall elect one of the Vermont School Boards Association appointees and one of the Vermont National Education Association appointees as co-chairs or, as the case may be, co-vice chairs. And now, original language, such other officers and assistant officers as may be deemed necessary may be elected or appointed by the directors. And then there are several other minor sort of, well, not editorial, but small wording changes that would make the remaining bylaws regarding the board's officers consistent with what I just said. There's a provision regarding special meetings, and I change the board chair to a board chair. Special meetings of the directors may be called by a board chair in case there are 2, and the current bylaws allow each chair to make that decision on his or her own. The first sentence of the reservation section would read, a director may resign at any time by giving written notice to the board or the board chair, which I changed to its chair. And that could be 2 chairs, but seems consistent. That one may not in fact be necessary, but it seems consistent with there's a section as well, Section 5, relating to board chair, which would read, the board chair and or co-chairs shall be, change a director to directors, and shall preside at all meetings of the board of directors. The board chair, again, or co-chair, shall have all powers and duties as set forth, and continuing on the language. And finally, the vice chair section would simply add reference to co-chairs in the same manner as the board chair. So with your permission, I'll forego reading that one. But it is Section 6. And it merely adds the words co-chairs or the words or co-chair. All right, I'll read it, I apologize.
Can you pull back your, because I'm looking at the November 1 memo, I'm
So
sorry.
go to page 3 of the
Page three
November
of the
1
November.
memo. And here's what the minutes is gonna say based on what I understand. At the second paragraph where Joel starts with the word consequently, the minutes is gonna say Joel moved instead of consequentially I move, that the bylaws relating and everything else on that page is his motion.
Okay.
And
I'm
it
looking
doesn't
at the
have-
wrong November 1 memo.
Page 3, it's labeled B, how we will determine who chairs the board.
You know what, I'm wondering,
There's
2,
2 November 1.
3, this,
There's nothing in this November 1 packet. Here.
It wasn't in,
you know what, it was confusing the way that it got put together because of the way
the other November one?
Yeah.
I got it, I just found it.
In the middle of your package, you have a second memo, late November 1, and she was starting
I
from
see.
there instead of the
I
first.
see.
All right,
So
I'm caught up.
he's moving
almost.
from here for the whole rest of
Yeah,
the
in
page.
fairness to the klutz who put this all together, I did put a cover page on this explaining what was to follow, so, okay. All right, so let me read that last segment regarding vice chairs. And again, it's mere addition of words like co-chairs. In the absence of board chair or co-chairs, or in the event of the board chairs or co-chairs, inability or refusal to act, the vice chair or co-vice chairs shall perform the duties of the board chair, and when so acting shall have all the powers, et cetera, et cetera. The vice chair or co-vice chair shall perform such other duties as from time to time may be prescribed by the board chair or co-chairs or other directors. All of that repetitive stuff stems from the notion that we might have co-chairs or vice chairs. The local color that I might add,
Do you need a second for that motion?
I guess so.
Second?
The local color that I might add is that there's nothing new about the notion of having co-chair, nor is there anything new about having one chair. What is obviously different here is that this motion will give us the opportunity to see if we can decide on one person as chair, but not end up in hopeless deadlock if we can't. And so obviously, the simplest way to resolve it is by the mechanism of co-chair with each so-called delegation choosing its own. The addition to that is this. The theme with which I approach this work, at least for the first period of time until we get ourselves underway, is the reestablishment of equality in this room. In the absence of equality in this room, nothing will get done usefully for the members. And when I say members, I include school board members as well as Vermont VEHI members. Until that is reestablished, we are going to be impaired. One obvious component of reestablishing equality in this room is by ensuring that both Vermont VEHI's appointees and VSBA's appointees are satisfied with the identity of the leadership of the board. There's nothing new about that either. The negotiation commission, I guess it's called, negotiation commissions, whatever you guys are called, Elizabeth now, has the mechanism of, actually, I think it jumps right over the possibility of selecting one person, and they have co-chairs reflecting the management and labor side of that table. And Laura, I'm gonna look at you, I'm not sure you'll remember, but one of the originating documents of the new board, I don't mean in 2013, listed the board members at that time, and the board members at that time included Mark Hage and Laura Suarez, each of them followed with a comma followed by the word co-chair. So we have our own experience in this room with co-chairs. Then everything, obviously, the composition has changed. So the amendment, I guess, as they say, the proposal speaks for itself. We can try to elect one person, and if that doesn't work, no harm, no foul, we would then move on to the establishment of two people as co-chairs, and then let them figure out how to run these meetings collaboratively. And with that, I yield the floor.
Martha?
I have a proposal that I was hoping to be able to voice before a motion was made, but obviously we'll move forward. I had a proposal thinking that maybe it would work best if we say that the chair is selected by and from among either the Vermont NEA or the VSBA, and that the vice chair be appointed by the opposite group, and that to show that we're all on board here, we're all working together, that it be the Vermont NEA that has that first chair position. With the caveat that, neither chair or vice chair have the authority to speak for the board unless it has been deemed by the board, and that agendas would be created by the two in concert. I think that might work, as well as co-chairs. I personally have never had the existence of a board that has co-chairs, and I don't know how that may or may not work. That's a proposal that I was thinking of putting out here.
Robert?
Well, I do like that Joel led by saying rotating, so
Mhm.
that could be incorporated. And
Right.
If we went down this path of saying, if the chair is from the Vermont NEA, the co-chair would be from the School Board Association, and it's rotating, we could stipulate a term. I have to emphasize, and Joel, you said a very good point, you said equality. Well, a board like this, I liken to an interdisciplinary team. And maybe this is not something that you're familiar with, but in industry. And you bring in people from, say, finance and marketing and IT, and it's very important that they check their respective identity at the door and they focus on the mission of the team. We will achieve equality here, not by numbers, but by each of us buying into the notion we're here to serve the members, including the school district. It's an attitude, it's not a numbers thing. So I think if you had a rotating arrangement, and we each show goodwill, that demonstrates equality. I am not aware of any organization, and I have worked in multinational banks, I've worked in government agencies, I've consulted for dozens of companies, I've worked with the military. I've never seen co-leadership positions, other than the very narrow scenarios you just alluded to. I've never seen it. I've never seen a private sector company, I've never seen a government agency, I've never seen, certainly not in the military, I've never seen it where there is a co-anything. So I'm not comfortable with it, but I seem to be hearing, Joel, it's not necessary if we can agree on who to elect. And I think what Martha's saying is we can, but I think to the point about equality, that's an ongoing message. And I think we've got to let it be known, we're here for the benefit of all the members, the school districts, and that transcends a numbers thing, in my opinion.
Joel?
I understand the perspective, I don't understand the proposal, and I fundamentally disagree, not with the wish underlying the notion of equality being the equivalent of parking your identity at the door. That's not how it's worked for the last 5 years. You would have had to have experienced what I experienced for 3 of those years, and what Mark's experienced for 5 of those years, and what Jeff Van experienced for 2 of those years, to get a sense of how unequal the treatment of Vermont NEA and its members has been. So I have to reject out of hand the notion that
Hey, Joel, would
I'm in the middle of.
direct those to me, please?
Excuse me?
Direct those comments to me, please?
There's 6 people on the board, we could probably have a conversation without worrying about that. I was responding to Robert, I was looking at him, so I'm talking to Tracy as I speak. Tracy, I disagree with the proposal Robert's just made, and with all due respect, Martha, I don't yet understand your proposal. What we could do is simply move into a mode of seeing if we can elect one person now, because that is the import of my proposal. If we can, fine. If we can't, we need a methodology to resolve this, and I don't understand the proposal that is being suggested. There's no motion or anything attached to it.
Well, you have a motion on the
You have
table.
My
motion.
motion is on the table.
Right, so I can't make a motion right now. That was my point.
Okay, I don't.
So that's why I was just,
And now I'm
Putting out
confused
the
about the
proposal.
motion.
Well, I don't think you're confused, you have it on
We have
page
his
3 right in
motion
front of you, that
I
remains the
know.
motion.
But the motion is in the event that we can't elect one director as chair or vice chair.
Correct. Yes,
So do
what's your
we,
thought?
should we take that question up first?
You know,
procedurally, I'm
The
just a
board-
little
the board
confused
can
about how we
reject-
go
The board
forward.
can reject an action item.
Okay.
But my point has been and will remain after we fail to select one person as chair, that we need an alternative. And so rather than jump to the fact, to the likelihood that we won't be able to elect one person, I thought that the bylaws should finesse that by saying, well, perhaps there will be one person, maybe only one person is willing to serve as chair, in which case that would be the outcome. But in the event that it isn't the outcome, this board needs annually a mechanism to resolve the problem.
Thank you, you clarified. Robert has something to say, and I want to check in with.
Just, and
Patty and
I
Fran.
wasn't trying to relitigate the past, you're right, I wasn't here. I naively thought the issue of equality has been addressed, and that there's now an equal number is on its face.
Not yet.
That has gone away, so I was merely saying, not to impute motives or anything, but to say, I presume we're coming in here to execute the mission and we have a common goal. And then I think the public could look at this board as it's constituted now and say, there is equality, 3 and 3. So notwithstanding, I'm not trying to deny whatever perceptions you have about the past, but just say going forward, we appear to be equally balanced, 3 and 3. And so the question is, your motion might be moot if.
How do I say this differently? It might be moot annually, but each year, this board is going to be called upon with a 3 and 3, a makeup of 3 and 3, to select its chair.
I understand.
It could be moot, but it really, really might not be. It really might not be. And the notion of equality is not merely a question of numbers. It's a question of roles and responsibilities.
Want to make sure, yes, please.
Yeah, gladly. When I think about the equality of this board, I think the legislature's had to step in and mandate uneven numbers. I'd like to see us fully move forward in an equal manner, and I think that co-chairs would move us a long way. I think it would force close communication and close actions at the highest level. I work on an interdisciplinary team. I've got a co-president of my association with 500 members, so I have had experience in those roles, and it worked quite effectively. I think that this proposal of co-chairs, I liked parts of Martha's about perhaps the rotating or whatnot, but I think the idea of co-chairs would push us to make the real blending of the boards. And so that's one of the elements that I like immensely about the idea of co-chairs, is the forced blending as we come together.
Fran? You don't have to speak if you don't want to. I just want to make sure you get a chance.
Thank you. Well, first I have to clarify, but who is the vice chair right now?
Jeff Fannin.
Jeff Fannin.
Oh,
It's empty at the moment.
okay, that,
You guys haven't acted to fill it yet.
got it, okay, that was my, just let me clarify that.
Joel was before Jeff, and
That's the only reason I knew Jeff was. We talked a lot about it. He came to me for advice about how to
and
perform.
actually, just for the record, Joel was vice chair, he became vice chair when Tracy became chair, he served in it until he left the board, and then Jeff was in it. So we haven't really rotated either position for the whole time, except for as forced to by.
There has never been an example of the co-chair by chairing a meeting, not one.
So, I understand that the idea, Martha, of one group than the other, the chair, the rotating. But I guess, given that the way that the legislature has now set up, has reset the number for the VEHI board, has also now set up the commission, is that what we're calling it, the commission? For,
That's what I'm calling
the
it.
commission, okay, so the commission,
That's what
which
they call it.
has the co-chairs. And given that, I mean, the bottom line is we do need to work together in terms of management and labor, and it's a, management labor construct. So to have the co-chairs, one from both sides, I think a lot of issues could get sort of hammered out or all between the co-chairs before we even have, sort of deal with it then as a full board, and could maybe sort of smooth the way more easily for stuff to get resolved. Yeah, I mean, I have served I've worked with team groups that do the co-chair, but I guess my biggest thing is it would then kind of fit well with the model that the commission has, and then VEHI would be in the same kind of configuration. So there's a commonality there with how things are organized. And it would enable, again, the labor and management needing to work together from the outset of even setting an agenda.
I just want to remind folks that our mission as a board is to oversee the operations of VEHI.
That's the element.
Yeah, and,
And so, can I speak again?
yes,
Because I didn't get a chance to, make mine as a motion. But it was on the premise that, the chair and the vice chair would be working in concert, and that there would be that needed communication between the two, to set the agendas, to, move forward on anything that, needed to be done, that there would be a clear line of communication for our protocols, our communication protocols, that they would have to work in concert. So, to me, it still makes sense to have a chair and a vice chair, so that way if for some reason there is a need to have the one, it would be the chair. And if the chair was absent, then it would automatically fall to the vice chair to run the meeting. How do you run a meeting when you have vice chairs? Again, I don't have the experience. And I would definitely, in my proposal, would put in, this would be an amendment to the bylaws, just like yours would have been, or is, or whatever, that it would be on an annual basis, the first meeting after the annual meeting, that the chairs rotate, or the positions rotate, and then it's the members of the appointing committees that appoint their chair and the vice chair. So it's, you get to appoint who you want, so there's no, well, we can't vote on one because we don't have a quorum, we don't have a vote, we can't pass a vote.
so, Robert, and
Well,
then,
I was just saying to Fran's point, but really, the chair and the vice chair as presently constituted would work together on the agenda, but my understanding is, not.
That's never been the case.
But that would be the proposal, that they would have to be.
So yours has not been formally presented yet.
Right.
I think as you began by saying rotating chairmanship, I hear what you're saying, that Jul's saying maybe things won't be so friendly a year from now, or 2 years from now, and then,
I'm hoping they're friendlier.
pardon me?
I hope so.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, I like to think so far, maybe I'm not the most observant
I
person,
predict
but.
they'll be friendlier.
Good, but I'm just saying, I think to go to a co-chair besides, again, I find it's a model I don't see anywhere else, we've given examples. To me, it's a solution in search of the problem. And if we're of goodwill and we can move forward for this year, and I don't see why not in subsequent years.
so we have a motion on the table to amend the bylaws. And I was gonna ask if we wanna move that question, continue discussion. I think there's lots of ideas out here, but procedurally, I wanna keep you on top of the fact that there's a motion to amend the bylaws that Joel made, and I'm not gonna restate it because it's in writing on page 3 in front of all of us. So I'm looking to you for indications of your preference around that.
To call the question?
Do you wanna call the question, you wanna continue discussion?
I want to respond to Robert.
Okay, you may.
I may have looked like I'm varying from the task at hand with my little
No.
phone in hand. I was just looking up the word co-chairman. It's all over the place, thousands of places. It's been in existence since at least 1935. And there are examples around this table where people have had at least limited experience with co-chairs. In terms of who runs the meeting, let the co-chairs figure that out. That's not gonna be all that hard. If it's that hard, we've got more fundamental problems than that. My fundamental theme is going to be repeated time and time again until it isn't needed. Until there is reestablished equality in this room, there will not be a high-functioning organization again. It's that simple, Robert, and Tracy.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. Until that fundamental dysfunctional aspect of VEHI is changed, we will not become, again, a high-functioning organization. We have got to get past this point before we can get to the work at hand, because we don't yet have equality in this room, other than the potential for deadlock.
I sincerely hope that when we get to the work plan and we do things like revisit the mission, we can
Are you responding to me? or
address
are you-
those sorts of questions. Yes, I am.
Okay.
And then we'll get back to the question. Want to respect individual perceptions of the work of the board in the past. My experience is not consistent with that. I think the record shows that most of the decisions of the board over the past 6 years were unanimous or close to unanimous. And all members of the board were active in moving and making motions, seconding motions, and moving us forward as an organization. That said, I understand that we are a newly configured board and we need to have those conversations and together revisit our mission and decide how we move forward in a way that is respectful of the board composition. With that, however, I want to be sure we go back and we have a motion on the table to amend bylaws. Joel.
Having been a participant in those almost unanimous decisions, I think it's safe for me to say that, as a matter of personal experience, that is the issue. Of course, it was easy to get almost unanimous decisions. The board makeup was 4 representatives of school boards and 1 representative of basically the 40,000 people who are insured under VEHI. That is the issue. That's
So,
and it
again,
will not change.
I don't-
Not a change in leadership
Replaying the
structure.
past is not productive at this point in time.
Well,
I
that is
think,
your opinion.
I think,
That is
please
not
stop
the case.
interrupting me. I think we will have an opportunity to talk about the ways we worked in the past and the way we want to work in the future. And we should identify that as part of the board plan. I think it would be appropriate for me as chair, as long as I continue on the chair, to point out that some of the discussion we just had is not necessarily germane to the question at hand, and get us to move on. There is a motion on the floor to amend the bylaws. Is there discussion specific to that remaining, or should we vote on that motion?
I would hope that we could try to work towards, a chair, vice chair situation with the appointment being made by the groups, at least for this first year. With the assumption that it would be the Vermont NEA appointing the chair for this very first term. I would hope we can
Is there a
strive for that.
term to that? Is it good for X time, or is that?
For a 1-year rotating process.
Peggy?
I think that's a separate, right, piece, you haven't tried to make a friendly amendment or anything at this point, right?
I have not.
Okay, I just wanna make sure, cause my question is, I do wholeheartedly support, based on my experiences and, moving forward, the idea of co-chairs. Could somebody explain the negatives, because maybe we could address those, are there specific negatives that you find to co-chairs? You were not familiar with the process.
Well, it's familiar enough to say it strikes me as it increases the chances for deadlock. But I keep coming back to it's a gesture. In terms of the equality that Joel keeps alluding to, there's 3 from the NEA, 3 from the school board, so.
Not 3 in leadership. There's 3 of us each on the board, but the leadership has not been established to be equal at this point in time. The equality is not there. So there's an unfamiliarity piece with co-chairs. You had mentioned who runs the meeting. I can certainly speak that in my experience, when we constructed, I said, oh, I'll take this one. I can talk to you about this. Do you have information on that? Then you're gonna lead with that one. And that's what I would see coming out of the roles of the co-chairs, that there's gonna be that discussion moving forward, play to people's strengths as we move forward. Whoever chairs whoever would represent the Vermont NEA group might say, they'd represent all of us. Poor choice on my part, I'm speaking off the cuff here.
Thank you.
But whoever was that person might say, oh, I know Peggy's had experience with this. Somebody else might say that I know Tracy's had experience with this. I think that would start to make the blending happen.
Why would that process not happen under our existing
Right.
structure? We're not a board of 200 people, we're 6.
This is our second meeting since October.
Right.
And again, one hit at a time in your analogy, but I
Right.
think that this would bring more to the table so that we could have those base hits and keep going. That's my personal experience and my personal preference. Clearly, there are other places that agree with it. The commission has decided that that is the right way for them to go forward as well. But if there are any other negatives that you have, I could certainly be happy to share my experiences or to try to speak to what my vision at least is and why I support this. And if I don't feel great here, I ramble, I apologize.
Any other discussion? So the question before us is still whether or not we want to amend the bylaws.
Per Joel's
Per
November 1st.
Joel's, yes, to say that if we can't elect one, we would have co-chairs.
Can I make a friendly amendment?
It's up to Joel.
I don't know. I'll
Well,
listen.
so yours says if we can't elect a chair, can we put in there that instead of, if we can't elect one, that we have the different groups appoint? And if they can't appoint, then there's the co-chairs?
I don't understand.
No.
I'd like to be
Well-
friendly, I don't understand what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
So you're
Right.
saying if there was non-agreement within the NEA 3 and within the school board's 3,
As 6?
well, I'm asking.
Well, because it says in the event the director cannot be elected or
Doesn't it be
chair.
like, say, in the event that the directors, all 6 of
Yeah,
us,
cannot elect one.
because we require decision of majorities of each group,
So,
right?
okay, so my amendment would be, in the event the directors cannot elect one director as chair, we move to this premise that the NEA appoint the chair and the BSBA appoint the vice chair.
In the informal sense, I accept that as friendly, in the formal sense, I do not.
So this is a big motion, and so let's vote on this motion. And if it passes, the decision is made and we move on to the next thing. If it doesn't, we can try something else. So, it's been moved and seconded to amend the bylaws to provide that in the event that directors cannot elect one director as chair and one as vice chair, they shall elect co-chairs with a representative. I'm not gonna read the exact words. We'll do co-chairs. And as the case may be, co-vice chairs. May I? All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed?
No.
Nay.
Okay. So that motion does not pass. We have a choice now to discuss further whether we want to amend the bylaws in a different way. Or perhaps, Martha, you want to take a shot at a motion and having some discussion,
Yes, I would like to take a shot at the motion.
okay?
I'd like to take a shot with the motion being that starting as of January, which is now, the chair is selected by and from among Vermont NEA appointees to the the VEHI board, and the vice chair is selected by and from among VSBA appointees to VEHI board, and that the next organizational meeting and each year thereafter, the positions will be reversed. And in concert with that, that the board communication protocols would be that agenda meetings and of the board shall be jointly developed by the chair and vice chair, and that board communication protocols be amended to indicate that authority to speak for or otherwise represent the VEHI board is granted jointly to the chair and vice chair, and that separately neither position is authorized to represent or speak on behalf of the VEHI or of the board.
Can I go make a copy of that?
Sure.
For everybody?
I
Since you do
scribbled
have
all
it
over,
written down.
yeah.
That's all
I
right.
started with one and then I said, well, maybe it should be,
If you
I
don't,
started with two and then I said, maybe they should be one. So. This goes into this.
all right, I'll do it like next week.
Okay. That's okay.
While copies are being made, are there preliminary clarifying questions or discussion?
For a second.
Oh, can I have a second? Thank you. Oh, my note taker isn't here, but can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
I missed that. What was the motion?
So far,
I
we
just
just had
read
a
it.
second, so we now have motion on the floor.
I lost
We
track.
didn't miss anything.
Thank you once again.
Clarifying question. The end part of your proposal, you know, I see it printed.
Which, and,
The last couple of sentences,
yes,
could you say read them again? I'm sorry,
as
or
soon,
no,
as soon as she brings them back.
oh, okay, you don't
But
know, we
it-
can,
It had to do with,
speaking, that one wouldn't, could you explain what you mean?
so if there's an announcement that needs to be made or a press release, that that they need to work together, that neither one can do it individually, and that it has to be authorized by the board.
So we have a protocol
Yes.
for
Protocol for
communication
communications.
that speaks to, it's in your packet.
Currently, our protocol says if the chair.
So, over a 2-year period, wouldn't that
They'll
do
function
the
as
same?
co-chairs,
Function as
exactly where we were.
co-chairs.
No, but this would, with respect to your point about equality, wouldn't this do the same thing over a 24-month period?
Ours would have done it in a 12-month period, because essentially they're gonna function as co-chairs, as we envisioned. You just now have maintained the titles of chair and vice chair versus co-chairs, what I see is the big difference. And 24 years to, 24 months versus we would have been there.
Well, but I guess here's where we disagree. I don't see that there's a there there. Meaning, I said the first part of Joel's thing, there wasn't anything, fine. But to go beyond that, to me, seemed to be a solution in search of a problem, especially if we adopt this. Then, to someone who said, is this board equal? Well, yes, 3 and 3, and over 24 months, we rotate.
I don't think I don't know how it works. I don't think what we're saying is all that different. I agree with what you're saying. I think the proposal of co-chairs would have said the board's equal 3 and 3. The leadership shared from day one going forward, not over a 24-month period. That's all I see.
No, any other type?
I have another.
Laura has
I know how it
Laura
works.
has, oops, I'm losing it. Food. Laura has a clarifying question, and then I'll look to you, Fran.
Okay.
Food.
No, I had 2 clarifying questions. I don't know what that is, whether there's ham, but that wasn't my clarifying question.
Martha, can you ask?
As I was first writing your motion, before I see the written thing, I was going to put starting at this meeting instead of giving a
Yes,
date. You seem
that
to
makes
be
sense.
uncertain about that.
Right.
So is it okay if it says starting at this meeting? And then everything else that's on this paper for the motion?
Yes.
And Peggy, you seconded it, would you
I
mind?
did.
Okay. Seems to be weird to be retroactive.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, now, Fran,
I'm not finding
And
it.
I can't seem to find, where do our bylaws, whatever, spell out the duties and responsibilities of the chair?
Just what's in the bylaws,
The bylaws.
which is pretty vanilla if I remember it.
And then we have the board communication protocol.
Oh, well, that's,
The April
yeah,
2014.
but it's, what is it that the chair is required, is expected, required?
Preside at all meetings, and then the longer.
So it's on page 8 of 12.
Have all powers and duties as are set forth in the bylaws.
Right, so
Which
where
is-
are those?
Well,
That's
they are to preside at all meetings.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not missing something.
Unfortunately
Yeah,
not.
Okay, because that's what I was reading, is other yeah, it's perform all duties, so that's why I was, what are all the duties?
That are set forth in the bylaws, and this is it right there.
There's, like, I'm not
Incidents to the
missing.
office.
So, and I tried to, when we laid out the agenda, besides presiding at the meeting, the big things are communication, per our communication protocol, it's not even a policy, it's a protocol, and agendas. And so we wanted to make sure that those three things are thought of as we're considering how we handle this. Which is why we grouped it the way we did when we set up the agenda. I can't think of anything else. Sometimes I have to sign things on behalf of the board.
We do.
Get rid
But
of-
the board chair has to sign to move money, I think, big amounts of money.
Once in a great, and I think I sign like service agreements, but I sign that at the authority of the board.
That is given at a meeting, yeah.
What about a reserved parking spot?
No, I don't do that.
Employee of the month.
Nothing. And I'm farther away from the food.
Not anymore.
Try that, tell us what it is.
All you had to
I
do was
really
ask.
don't.
You get to proceed meetings, you don't get to
Thank
eat.
you. That's right. It's like probably prosciutto and
That's what it is.
provolone with a little fresh basil
Maybe.
and fig spread. Any other discussion? We totally went off, and now I'm eating cheese.
Sure.
Are we potentially calling the question and voting on this as a motion?
It's been moved and seconded, so at some point we gotta vote on it.
Discussion right now.
I'm anxious because I'm eating on camera.
That's, I'll ask you a question. So, if we look at the duties, how would this play out for vice chair where it says, in the absence of the board chair? I think you spoke, Martha, in a much more cooperative manner. And this says for the vice chair that it's really in the absence of the board chair that they do anything? So would,
But they would preside the meeting.
so would they be part of setting the agenda or other things like that? Because that would only be in the absence according to the bylaws.
So another
It says, the
clarifying question.
agenda for meetings shall be jointly developed by the chair and vice chair.
Oops, this one.
So this is not a bylaws amendment, because this is assuming that you're operating with the
Right.
current chair, vice chair.
Right.
Okay.
This is a motion to agree to practice a certain way,
A procedure
which
or.
could end up codified like you did your communication protocol.
Protocol, correct.
So this would override what's currently in the bylaws, or would we have to change that?
No, it matches what's
It
in the
matches what's in the
bylaw
bylaws.
and provides procedures that we could affirm formally. To perhaps achieve a common goal.
Agenda development is in the bylaws?
No,
No, that's a procedure.
so it doesn't
Procedural.
speak to it, it wouldn't actually contradict anything
Right.
in the bylaws. Not that you couldn't relook at the bylaws to see if you wanna make them clearer, but this wouldn't contradict
And that was my
the bylaws.
We'd be
So
working
this
within
is
the
the-
bylaws.
Moved and seconded. Keep going with questions.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not clear that in the bylaws, Article 4, number 6, for vice chair, it says, in the absence of the board chair, they're gonna do these, or the inability to serve, da-da-da-da. They shall perform the duties of the board chair, and when so acting shall have all the powers of and be subject to.
Which is preside over meetings.
Right,
sign something if something's acted on at that meeting.
Right, but this is saying that they will be part of constructing the agendas. So isn't that different than saying they don't do anything unless someone is enabled?
Well, this doesn't say what people don't do. The bylaws don't say what you don't do.
It starts with in the absence of,
Yeah.
it's the only time that you do anything, that was my concern.
Which bylaw are you looking at?
It's Article 4, number 6, and I could totally get that, I could be reading it wrong.
So I have to check it out.
Attorney.
Well, I guess, would this proposal, starting, well, it's gonna say no, starting, the chair selected by and among, right?
Yes.
Does that replace what exists right now for section 5 of Article 4? Where it says board chair?
Well, number 5 is just the
No, it's
duties,
just saying the
the
duties.
rules.
What's the answer?
Article 4, clause 5, board chair and vice chair just says what the
Oh,
rules are.
that's their duties,
Yeah, that's
okay.
their duties.
So what does this,
Article 2. At the
Article
top.
It was
two.
Article 2.
okay, thank you.
You are electing.
Okay.
Robert,
Just to your point, you're right, it says, the end of number 6, the vice chair shall perform other duties as may be prescribed by the board chair or
Or
director.
by the directors.
So,
And this would be
that's
by
right.
the directors.
Okay.
It's not that I'm having trouble concentrating, but I guess what I want to suggest is that we take a 10-minute break so that I can talk this through with a few people. So, may I?
you're not comfortable talking through it with us? With the whole board?
I don't want to answer that. I made a request for a 10-minute break so I could talk with some
Yeah,
people.
well, I don't mind a 10-minute break, but I
Okay,
need to
good,
say that
thank you.
caucuses of board members outside of the board meeting is not good board operation. You should have board discussions together.
I don't know what that means. Are
I'm
you
telling you,
suggesting it's a violation of the meeting? of the
I'm
law?
saying that's not good practice for a board to operate that way.
Uh,
But I'm happy to
Accommodate?
accommodate a 10-minute break,
Good.
and I hope that you'll demonstrate good
Yeah,
board
the objective
practice.
is to help advance the work of the board, all right? And to clear my head.
Clear your head is fine.
10 minutes.
Actually, I need to do that too.
You palm right back, don't you?
I do.
Oh.
I'm not
Yeah.
so sure about the snooze balls thing.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful drive.
How long is it?
Oh, yes, Elizabeth,
How
help
long is it
yourself.
taking?
Just
Thank
under
you.
2 hours? Yes, I am,
Only
sorry.
10 minutes.
I am with it, I got it.
I'm almost afraid to check my email here.
I know.
This is a welcome, really, oh, God.
I don't think there's really anybody left in the building, but in that back corner, you can go and close.
Orange alerts.
Negotiation. I know.
We're still on camera.
It looks good. I don't have to talk, I don't like to eat.
It is good.
Yeah. I guess there's a 10-minute break, I can take a piece of cheese.
I'm gonna just,
That particular cheese is delicious.
which,
The kind of like orange on the.
That's probably Munster maybe, or
It almost tastes like
It's a
provolone
mild-
though, cause it's got like a salty taste to it, but it is.
excuse me.
Yep.
How you doing?
good, you?
Good.
Good.
I'd be worried about anyone who watches the whole world. Excuse me.
Yeah, it basically says 50% chance of snow between now and 6. Kind of looked at Berlin, Burlington, and Swanton. which
Yeah.
I know you're kind of heading that direction.
Yeah, because usually the stretch there,
Bolton.
Bolton Flats is usually always the worst. Especially if there's possibility of snow squalls. Cause that's where they will hit.
Unless you're going south, and that's between exit 4 and 5 is always the worst.
Oh, yeah,
Williamstown, Brookfield,
yeah.
its own little weather pattern.
You wanna pause the camera? I don't know how to run it, so.
Just watching me eat.
Yeah.
Wait.
Where did, Nicole go? Oh. Not that it matters, it's just curious.
I ask a lot of questions like that in the day. Doesn't really matter, I'm just
Just curious.
Yeah, I wave to the camera. We've discussed that people are just watching us eat right now.
Right.
Did any of you watch the last meeting?
No.
Just the last, first few minutes of it, just to.
I don't have the stomach to watch myself.
I always hate
Plus it's
watching myself
boring,
too.
you know, but
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
I don't watch school board meetings because I don't like watching myself on
I don't mind that I'm on the video, but I
Yeah,
don't wanna watch it.
I don't wanna watch myself on, yeah, exactly.
So are you trying to roll?
So where can we access
Shoot a
them?
roll?
I'm not good with that.
Nicole gave me a link, I thought I shared it
Oh.
on their website.
So I thought I could get away from the work emails, but they just pile up, right?
No getting away.
Is it prosciutto and
Mhm.
provolone or,
Yeah, good.
or mozzarella and basil? Bit of fresh basil maybe?
You could call it.
Alright.
Will you recognize the public at all?
Oh yeah, do you wanna be recognized?
I'll ask.
Sometimes you're hard for me to see.
I didn't want you, I mean, I didn't want to interrupt.
Your grandson.
She's doing well, but never a dull moment. I had her call last Friday, recalled her pacemaker. And when I was down there immediately, I'm like, so, we got down there Saturday midday. But the way they communicate, it's like, it's a ticking time bomb. So the good news is
Did you
it
have
was,
tennis basketball today?
yeah, kind of, yeah.
I
The good
would
news
have.
is it was.
Actually, I forgot it was Wednesday.
Was school canceled?
Nope,
It was soccer.
I had told the other
game,
coach that
think, but
I said, I have a meeting on Wednesday, so I can't be there. And he
It's the
I said, I have a
call.
board meeting on Wednesday, I can't be there. He goes,
Yeah.
to the farmer. Yeah, I
So-
think I have a board meeting
It
too.
all turned out fine, but it was a long day.
I think we both had enough on Monday. Oh, they were wild. So, we took a break.
Gave him the day off.
Huh?
You gave him the day off.
Yeah. I think some of the parents, I signed them up because they play basketball, then I don't have to pay for after school care.
Has the
I'm pretty sure.
commission started
I'm
meeting?
filling in for babysitting.
No,
or something.
not as a total commission, no, just as that.
You know, I started to think about
Various
with
parties.
Nicolette, not that she's not gonna be 3 till November, but I don't know, do they have public preschool? You know what I mean?
And that
And
would
if you
not
have,
be everything.
right, and if she has public, you know, sometimes preschools are harder than
Choice.
daycare, right? Because what do you do when preschool's done?
Like, sometimes, yes.
So Nicolette just started thinking about that.
Do it 3 hours a day.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I put mom in a preschool program that was like a day long.
Yeah.
So like half the day was really good at.
Right, but it was on the integrated program.
What do you, this time?
everybody.
All break needs addressed. All right, we're back. We are entertaining a motion to adopt an operating protocol that provides for the chair for this year to be selected by and from among Vermont NEA appointees, and the vice chair to be selected by and from the VEHI board, VISBIT board,
VSBA.
No,
Yeah.
change your V's.
VISBIT,
No biscuit.
Somebody, just say somebody.
VSBA, sorry, my apologies, the
lot of V's in
VSBA appointees, and that alternate after each organizational meeting annually, and that the agenda be developed jointly by the chair and vice chair, and communication protocols be amended to indicate that authority to speak for or otherwise represent the board is granted jointly to the chair and vice chair, and separately neither is authorized to represent or speak on behalf of the board. So that's the motion. Wondering if there's any further discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a friendly amendment, see if it can move us towards some common ground here. It would be changing the beginning part that instead of changing at the next organizational meeting, that the first term, the initial term be longer since we're already well into this year, and that it would be in October of 2020, and then after, change annually. Since we're into this year for, a third, fourth of the year already, and we would extend it, so instead of this October's meeting in 2019, it would roll around again until 2020, and then the rotation that you noted would start.
When in October?
Oh, sorry, there's an annual meeting of the members in October each year.
Well,
Correct.
you set your annual meeting, just so you know. It's actually, the board will set it
Okay,
sometime
we'll
in the
determine
next
the date.
6 months. It has traditionally been in October,
That's what I thought.
but you're not committed to that. And we can, at some point you can discuss that. So if you made that, I would suggest that you just say at the organizational meeting of 2020 and not use a month so that you're not jumping the gun.
That's good.
It doesn't have a month here either. So all you're doing is, you're suggesting that a year be added of 2020. That's how I heard your friendly amendment.
But we're obligated to have an organizational meeting
Correct.
Yes.
annually.
Yes.
Yes.
So if we deviated from October, it's not related to you, forgive me, but
Yeah.
would we be in violation of the bylaws?
No, that's just, it's not merely tradition, it's practicality. It dovetails with the annual
Yeah.
meeting of the superintendent and school boards.
And the election of officers comes to the meeting afterwards, correct?
Yeah.
That's when it-
Yes,
And that's why it kind of was being referenced.
the bylaws say,
It actually says
So
at.
there you go.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
After.
And they are elected annually at the first meeting of directors held after the annual meeting.
Okay.
So it could be on the same day, could be a week later.
It's really when we did have the first meeting, after the annual meeting, I was right there. So the evaluation.
well, the bylaws also provide for continuation of the chair, the officers unless and until there's another appointment.
Yeah.
Does Martha have to say yes or no to the friendly
Oh,
amendment before
yes.
the discussion? No, just wanted to give you a chance, Martha. That's what I thought.
I don't have a problem with that.
Thanks.
Does that rise to the level of friendliness?
Yeah.
Just what it
Is it sufficiently friendly?
Our public has
Can I
indicated
offer
a
a
wish
public?
to comment. And
Is it
unless there's
appropriate
a
to-
board member burning to comment, I would welcome comment from the public.
Is that appropriate to offer, or to,
Does anybody else have something, a question, comment at this time? Typically,
We're
we,
not foreclosed if I yield to Elizabeth, okay?
no, you're not foreclosed, but typically before we get to vote,
You're not.
if there is an interest in public comment, we welcome that. not always good about doing that. Yes, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments on the discussion that's gone on. The first is the experience that I've had on the South Burlington School Board is that there is a defined chair role and a clerk role. And that has worked really well in terms of delegation of those typical chair duties in the absence of someone or so forth, and signing capabilities and things like that. Around the specific areas of communication and agenda setting, that typically is done by the governing body. So that's where you sort of, there's avoidance of conflict if somebody either isn't experienced or is uncomfortable or whatever the issue might be. That's kind of how that issue is addressed. I also have had experience within the community of having co-superintendents as well as co-presidents of the local association, and both of those, or the experience in the co-superintendent role actually, I felt was not very effective, and part of it was it ended up divvying up a job that was really too big for one individual at the time. So it was almost like you had two separate job descriptions, and it was not the concept, I think, that Joel moved forward on vice chairs. As far as the union, my understanding is that role is also sort of doing elements of the job that's bigger than one person can allow right now, and it really serves the local membership in that capacity. And the last thing I would just observe is I do think the board may want to consider, since this board is really not a negotiating body, is the notion of caucuses, which I don't know what that 10-minute break was, but that may be something the board may want to consider in terms of its operations going forward. So I would just offer up those to inform the recent discussion.
So we're back to the proposal for board officers, which I will not restate another time. Is there comment?
As
I will say that here's what, as the minute taker I have, so correct me if I'm wrong, change the word next to 2020. So instead of January 1, 2019, it says starting at this meeting. Instead of the word next, it says 2020.
Yes.
The 2020 organization.
Otherwise, you have a written motion. So
And
at the
then-
2020
and then each
organizational
year
meeting and
thereafter,
each
yeah.
year thereafter.
Yeah.
Is organizational meeting a term of art in our
yes.
world, or is it annual meeting? Is it organizational meeting?
Oh,
No, the organizational meeting
No, I
happens
think
after the annual meeting.
Change.
Right.
Oh, okay, all
the
right.
annual
all right.
meetings of the
Of the
membership.
membership, yeah.
Right.
So the organizational meeting
Is
is
the
what,
appropriate one to
all
do
right,
here.
we reconvene,
That would
we
flip
elect chair and clerk,
October.
we
Yeah.
go
Got
over
it,
bylaws,
thanks.
we work on our work plan for the year.
That confuses, we were talking about, so interchangeably.
And I also had the motion saying that Martha made a motion,
Oh,
seconded
I'm
by
sorry.
Peggy, and it's been friendly amended, but it's to
Sorry.
establish an operating protocol. 2.
So you were.
Wait, time out.
Hold up.
I wanna
You
give,
got conversations.
got lots of conversations, I wanna give Fran next audience.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you were just referring to, but in terms of the motion that has now been a friendly amendment put in the thing, I think that's a good way to move forward, because with the changes, we're sort of starting off real slow at getting ourselves reorganized and moving forward. So I think that going to the 2020 gives us time to really get ourselves organized and functioning in what should be a newer, more cooperative way, without us sort of having a jolt in the middle of it. And I think we need the time to get ourselves back on track as an organization. So Martha, I like the amendment with the friendly acceptance of the amendment.
Joel?
A couple things, no particular problem. I wonder, but I think we'd have to leave it to them to figure it out in front of us. What happens if the chair and the vice chair disagree about public comments? Which gets to, basically, it speaks against my original motion around co-chairs. I don't think we should do anything about that. I think we should leave it the way it is. but acknowledge that we may confront a time when the chair and the vice chair disagree about what the board's stance on an issue is.
Then that should
Then
be
that
that the
should be
board
the
has not
board.
taken a stance on an issue,
I understand that's what you said.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's probably what would have to happen.
right?
Or
But if we
there
have an
would- or there'd
opinion,
be-
if we have
there
a
would be-
position, we've got to,
That said, I do have I want to follow up on Mark's question about the term organizational meeting. I think he was right to raise it. If I understand it right, the bylaws refer to the process we're talking about here as occurring at the first meeting, meaning the first meeting of the board after the annual meeting. And we use the term organization to mean that. I wonder if we shouldn't change this so that it reads.
first meeting after the
At
annual one.
basically at the first meeting held after the annual meeting of 2020.
Are you making a friendly?
I guess that's yet another offer.
Too friendly.
So I have a question, because now I'm confused. If we decide tonight,
That was my purpose, but.
right, yeah. See, at least he's upfront about it. But seriously, I mean, so if we decide tonight on a chair and a vice chair, that tenure runs until when? I'm confused now.
Basically, probably the third weekend or fourth weekend of October 2020.
So 18 months,
Yeah.
19
Right.
months, instead of 12. Otherwise, it would run 7, 8, 9,
Yeah.
whatever, I can't count. It's not gonna run 12 this year, one way or the other, if you peg it to that time. So, is this
Wait, is
friendly
the
amendment been
friendly-
accepted?
I
That-
gotta ask again how it's,
So here's what I wrote,
and,
so check me, because it doesn't matter what Joel says, what matters what I write, right?
right,
Appointees to the VEHI board, comma, you with me?
Yep.
And that at the first meeting held after the 2020 annual meeting, and each year thereafter, the positions will be reversed.
That's fine.
yeah,
That's it. Do you accept it?
yes.
You are
All right,
really-
is there more discussion of the motion and amendments?
Can I call the question?
Yes, you can. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Mhm.
Thank you, we have a process.
Yay, all right.
Moving forward, just so
There you go,
So,
little rally.
can we elect officers? I would entertain a motion. I don't know exactly how we're gonna handle this. I'm gonna do it the normal way, but I'm gonna look to the Vermont NEA members,
Oh, yeah.
appointees, for a motion, or not a motion, a nominee.
We're just gonna appoint.
Elect. Just want you to know, we've already done it, and we did it by rock, paper, scissors.
I did about who could touch the nose first.
No, I'd be the one that touched it, not
Tracy was actually trying
Not
to
it.
come up with something.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just thinking about what an appropriate process.
Well,
You're selected.
I guess it's the election of 3 people in the room.
That's
We
what
could
I
either-
was
We
thinking.
could either leave the room and make the choice, or just do it.
We are a public body,
Right.
so I'm thinking you guys should make a nomination and vote on it.
I nominate Joel Cook. I second it. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Thank
2
you.
to
I
1.
just want you to know that's still let the record.
The majority's in it.
All right, and the VSBA appointees,
Why don't you ask Joel now
Oh, do you wanna
seek
take over?
nominations?
Fulfill this obligation.
But she's in play, she shouldn't.
I'll say for
You
you.
can sit
Conflict.
there.
All right, and what's before us now is the selection of a vice chair, which shall be the election of the 3 representatives, the 3 appointees of Vermont School Boards Association. Are there any nominations?
Yes, I nominate Tracy Wren.
I'm gonna decline, and I'm gonna nominate Robert.
You can decline and nominate Martha.
I-
I don't think it's her fault to do that to her.
I'll only do it if I get the reserve parking spot.
Yes,
The reserve parking?
The reserve parking spot.
you tell me which one you want, and I'll have it
I mean-
reserved for you.
I'm sorry, I'm the chair.
Yeah, but you don't
I get a
have
reserve
parking
chair, you get the
spots.
parking space. Okay.
Then we can vote.
Yes, you have to vote. Oh, I'm
So you
I
are
apologize.
accepting the nomination?
It's a new role.
We need a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
You're gonna have to cut me a little slack
I
here.
have to ask if anyone opposes.
Are there anyone in opposition besides Mr. Latowski, Professor Latowski?
Do you
Won't
want
matter.
to preside over the rest of the
Probably
meeting?
should, yes.
Carry on.
All right, we are now moving on to the process through which the agenda is, yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, God,
Yeah.
Look at that loose leaf. Is that a 4-incher?
That's volume 8, I think.
Yeah, we-
Yeah.
It is.
No doubt.
That's how I remember.
All right, well, I'll make room on the shelf.
Call it my brain, not my.
Well, thank you, all. Actually, let me say just a word, less than a minute's worth. You may have noticed that I'm rather informal in my approach to meetings, not merely personal behavior, behaviorally, but I truly believe that we all ought to have our say. And if I have one flaw, and I probably have more than one flaw in how I approach meetings, it is by letting people talk and talk and talk, rather than saying, you've said enough. And so by all means, try to corral me when that occurs, because it is undoubtedly going to occur. That said, I appreciate the motion and the spirit in which it was brought, Martha. I think it accomplishes essentially what I personally have been looking for, which is not my ascension to this role, but to the notion of reestablishing equality in this room in a way that's acceptable to appointees from both organizations. So thank you for that very much. Okay. The next item on the agenda relates to the development of agendas, which is now consigned to Robert and me. But there is a process through which the agenda is to be established, and I think that's the subject of a proposal that Peggy made in December. So I will ask Peggy, I guess, to do so.
And we have that
Does
somewhere,
everybody
right?
have that?
I'm trying to
It's
find
from
it again.
December. I have a couple of extras, but
Oh,
I
you
gave
do?
others away.
Oh, I do have it.
Do you have it?
Now that I
Okay,
just
great.
saw your, what it looked like.
It's right here. And there may need to be changes at this point. In terms of formality, did we already make this motion by giving it to you on December 20th?
No.
So, no, you haven't made a motion, because you just, you
It
ran
was
out of
just a
time.
proposal.
Just
and
gave
you-
us information.
And people agreed to abide by it for.
But you have made a motion now about agendas that you need to think about issues, you might want to modify that.
Okay, so then I would ask for some help in how we have to change this, but the basic idea was timing and sequence of how we get items on the agenda. Number one is essentially that at the end of each meeting, we would, put anything out there that we need to have on the next, the next meeting's agenda. Two, just talks about the fact that up to 2 weeks before, could submit items to, at this point, that would change, I believe, and it would have to be submitted to Joel and to Robert.
Mhm.
So that would have to change in number 2. Same thing, 2 weeks ahead of time, board members, staff, would have to give information to Joel and Robert. And again, that is with the understanding that something will come up. Even if we could plan everything 2 weeks ahead of time, it would probably be a lot more organized, but. That was the basic idea, it was just so that it was compiled ahead of time, there wasn't a lot of last minute changes. I believe they try to get the agenda out and materials at least a week ahead of time, correct? Is that the target date that you shoot for usually?
Yeah, I mean, my practice is a week, because if you do it too much earlier, people don't look at it, because it's not quick enough, or something changes, and if you don't give them a week, you don't have time for people to look at it. I mean, you can decide what you want for this board, but that's been my default, about a week.
Hence the 2 week popping up so often here that if we get information, people constructing it, so that then we could have it that week ahead of time.
So what that would mean, again, so if one were to open the Dropbox and see the board packet before, barring an unforeseen catastrophe or emergency, that
That's
is the
the
board
agenda.
package, as opposed to if I opened it 3 weeks before, and then there's a change, and then I've printed everything twice, and so I have 2 versions of completing things. It would be safe to say a week before, we can go to the Dropbox, and that will be the package.
The other thing that, again, this board needs to decide what works for them, the way that, I've done it is I'll send you an email saying the materials are in the Dropbox, they'll be in there. They don't change unless something happens, in which I tell you in an email that they changed. Now, you might want something different, that's how I do it. I don't put it in there before I tell you it's in there.
So, just some procedural things. Once the agenda is posted on the website, we should go with that agenda as is provided here, and if there are additions or amendments to the agenda, that should happen at the start of the meeting to comply with open meeting law. And my other 2 cents is, the overwhelming majority of the agenda should be driven from the work plan. Sometimes things come up at a meeting and we say, oh, we should take that up at a future meeting. It's been our past practice to defer heavily to the trust administrators about when in the work plan they fit best, because often things that come up require work, preparation work behind the scenes. So I do want to express my worry that that there may be a perception that somehow agendas are rapidly evolving plans, when in reality they should be really heavily driven off of the work plan, the annual required work we have to do, the big pieces of work that we map out as part of that annual plan, and beyond that, in concert, perhaps at meetings more often, and in concert with those that have to do the work to prepare us for whatever we want to deliberate. So I just want to add those pieces based on my experience.
I think that's well taken. I do want to add my own perception of the work of this board, and that is, and the resulting work plan, and it is simply this. Once we get past this period of adjustment regarding the notion of reestablishing equality in this room, and we're getting closer, things are going to run very smoothly here, and the work plan will have fewer and fewer items relating to the transition that we're involved in. Thank you. Okay, so I think the question before us is there was a motion or not yet? It is a motion. Maybe if you want to transform your proposal to a motion, we can, I guess, continue discussion if we need to, or act on it.
Then I propose the motion that's printed here with the one change that I see. In number 2, where it says board members may submit agenda items, I think it should now read to the chair and vice chair, to be included on the agenda at that meeting.
Is there a second
Not in
discussion?
charge, you can't
No.
look at me.
Okay, wait a minute.
It might be a,
Turnabout's fair play. If you want to talk to her, that's fine.
Agenda items 2 to board and vice.
Chair,
To the chair.
Carson,
Yes,
that's
sir.
3 names.
I don't know if this is a friendly amendment, but it doesn't change the tenor of your proposal, but I wouldn't mind incorporating some language at the top, like in the preamble, to say that we recognize that the agenda is primarily driven by the work plan. Is that, maybe again, that's a solution in search of a problem, or it's redundant. We all seem to agree on it, so maybe it's not necessary, but.
I'm just sitting here as the perverse minded chair at this point, thinking, there may be a meeting that isn't driven by the work plan.
No, we'd have a, like I said, primarily, or as a general rule, it is primarily, sufficiently equivocal to put that principle out. It's not I realize it's not a straitjacket.
I'm not opposed to that, but is that more a statement, it's more than philosophy, it's what we want to be action. But would that go here, or should that be something
I'm not sure. If it's not helpful,
I don't know if it belongs here, if it belongs somewhere else, or.
defer to the rest of you.
It's up to you to say include it or not. There's no obligation either way.
I'm okay with it, so I guess I'll accept it.
Can I make a friendly one too?
Sure.
Where it says agenda items for the next meeting, could we change that to a future meeting? Again, giving some deference to the chair to coordinate with the trust administrators about when that makes sense in context of the workflow. And the co-chair, since they both have to do it together.
Is it only in number one? I'm just scanning here.
I don't know, because I gave them hard copy.
Oh.
Laura? Yes.
Just as somebody who was a chair for 25 years before, and then has supported boards, I would suggest that you not get this detailed about the agenda at this time, that you let the chair and vice chair work together and see if they feel like they need a protocol. Because it just seems like we might be going too far, not, now that we've got a structure for chair and vice chair that have to coordinate with that, then I just feel like, you know,
So you're saying table this?
I mean, it hasn't been, yeah, I think it might be premature to get this detailed about an agenda, given the new structure and the new protocol that you already established that agendas are joint. But I'm not making the motion, so I thank you for
So
the chance to
I would say
make that
yes to
comment.
Tracy's friendly amendment to change in number one from next meeting to future meeting, giving the chair and vice chair the discretion to get, place it where needed. And I do hear what you're saying, Laura, I do feel that this is very, it's detailed. And, but I'd rather that come as a vote of the group than for me to pull it back. So we did have some struggles in the beginning with putting together an agenda or getting items on there that we wanted, and so I felt there was a need for us to have some just protocols that we knew. Maybe just 2-week deadlines would have helped, but, so I'll leave it there and folks can vote there.
So as amended, there was a proposal before the group. Are there any other comments in addition to Laura's that anybody wants to make?
Can I get clarification again as to the piece that's gonna be added for it, that you agreed to the friendly amendment of Robert's? This
Well,
one.
I merely wanted an allusion to it's a general principle, the work
General
plan
principle.
is not, no more than that, is, the work plan is the
No,
fundamental basis of.
So we don't run afoul of protocol. Can I ask you to run the minutes language before you post it by Robert on that issue, make sure that.
It captures what his intention is.
A statement in the preamble to say, we recognize that the established work plan is the foundation of foundation of agenda setting,
Okay.
subject to that. But, I don't leave it there.
All right. Seeing no other comments, everybody ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I want to add something on a related matter. I haven't been a chair of a public body before, but I've chaired thousands of meetings, and some in which I've been given the right to vote. And I intend to vote, and given our decision-making methodology, I don't think it makes sense for the chair to sit here silent. Okay, we are done with item 7 on the agenda. Thank
Okay,
you all
motion
very much.
passed, correct? Motion passed.
Motion passed without disagreement. Okay, we are now on to the appointment of corporate officers. The bylaws.
Let's see.
The communication protocol should be updated.
I thought that was it. I'm not quite sure why this is on the agenda, because I was not party to this one. So let me yield either to Tracy or to Laura. I'm not sure which of you.
So,
Tracy and Peggy put
yeah,
on the
again,
agenda.
this was on the agenda because this item specifically relates to a duty of the chairperson of the board, and Martha's motion that was ultimately accepted amended it. So we knew we were talking about roles and responsibilities of the chair.
That's what I thought we
And so, the communication protocol itself needs to be amended consistent with that earlier decision that we made. Do people have it in front of them?
I do.
So, let me see if I can,
It was in your materials today.
yep, that's it, make it make sense. I think item bullet point 1, VEHI's organizational positions are solely those that have been adopted by the board of directors. I think we've already alluded to the importance of that and that it might come up where individuals don't always agree, but if we don't have a position, we don't have a position. Number 2, in general, the chairperson of the board of directors will speak on behalf of the board. I think consistent with the motion that was passed earlier, the action that was taken earlier, it should read the chairperson and vice chair will speak jointly on behalf of the board. Right?
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Good.
Individual board members may speak on behalf of the board if delegated to do so by the board as a whole, or jointly by the chair and vice. Which means too, the chair could be knighted to speak on behalf of the board individually on specific positions we've adopted. And the section on trust administrator should not change.
Yes, it should, because now I'm not a trust administrator anymore.
So we should add the president,
Or trust administrators,
president,
and/or.
and/or trust administrators.
I would like to make sure, are you, is that?
Yes, thank you.
The, one question that leaves me with is, does the chair, or perhaps the vice chair, singularly have the right to speak if the other says go ahead? It says, I don't want us to be excessively tied to language that none of us really intends.
I think number 3 gives you that authority, because if you and
I understand
Robert,
number 3 does, but the motion we adopted grants
So number 2.
authority to the chair and vice chair jointly.
You want to add a clause, yeah, say unless one is expressly delegated to the other?
I think we should work it out and leave, and just proceed here, but.
you could say, you could say in the motion that was adopted that Martha Rowe, consistent with the communication protocols.
Okay.
And then as you.
This wasn't a bylaw, that's right.
It's not a bylaw. I think I see your point. Are you right, are you adopting 2 different things that aren't in alignment?
In the same
They could-
meeting.
Right.
Okay. I'm inclined to say going once, going twice. Do we have a motion
I'll move those amendments.
to the board communication protocol?
I'll second. Go ahead.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I can't keep up, you guys are too fast.
Let's see. That might change anytime now. The next item on the agenda, I think, is number 8, which is the appointment of corporate officers. This organization has 2 different categories of officers. Board officers, which are currently now the chair and vice chair. And the corporate officers are the president and the secretary. And I will continue to speak for a while because the proposal that is sitting in front of us and for me as part of that package I see on November 1st. And it is page 4, item C. And it's headed, how we will choose who acts as president and secretary. I won't read it out loud. I will paraphrase. Bylaws establish that the board chooses who acts as the president. Through an agreement with VISBIT, essentially delegates to VISBIT the authority. Now, I'm not suggesting there's anything improper at all about this, it's just the authority to provide VEHI a president. That's not the concern. The concern is the theme that I come into this room with, and that is the reestablishment of equality in all matters before this board. And this is an example of where 3 and 3 simply doesn't cut it. So the proposal I offered when I have it presented as a motion formally is similar to the proposal I made regarding the chair and a vice chair, and it is this. In the event that the board cannot select one person from its ranks as president, it shall again appoint what amounts to co-presidents. That was my thinking in November. My thought process then included the following. What we really want is a division of labor that is clear and defined and definitive, and that secondarily meets my personal condition for reestablishing equality in how this board functions. The president has duties to the corporation, which, for lack of an easier way of describing it, is the membership, the School Boards Association, and all the things that corporations generally do. The president also has duties relating to the functioning of the board of directors. And so my thought process was, back then, perhaps have 2 people share those latter duties as they relate to the board of directors. Sitting at home as I was thinking about that, I couldn't come up with the proper list, but I know 3 people in this room who could, and they are our trust administrators and president. And in meeting with Laura, you made a very compelling case for retreating from the notion of establishing a bylaw change to one of assigning to our trust administrators and president, and I guess I will say now, along with the chair, to develop a list of duties that fall under either heading of trust administrator and or president, and in particular distinguishing in the president's realm between duties associated with VEHI's board and with VEHI the corporation, and present it to us. I won't say at the next meeting, but I would like to say something on the order of 30 to 45 days. Something before spring. That's subject to discussion, but, so my proposal is not a motion to change the bylaws. It is instead to ask that our trust administrators and president present us within, I'll say it, within 45 days, a list, a categorized list of duties that make playing the roles of trust administrator and president, and particularly with respect to president as it relates to the corporation, as opposed to the VEHI board. So is that clear enough? The wording, you're gonna have fun with the wording, but.
I didn't hear you say a motion yet. I heard you sort of talk about a concept that maybe you want to explore before you finalize a motion? Or did you make a motion? I'm sorry, as chair, I wasn't expecting that.
I heard
I
proposals.
retreated from my proposed bylaw
I didn't have a
amendment,
motion.
and I intended to say I move, so. I move.
So I'm not in
I
charge.
move the form.
Then if you're moving, you're gonna have to actually say it. Because I don't think anybody does anybody know exactly what you moved?
Well, all right, the concept is clear enough, the wording not, I understand that. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the concept, because if it doesn't fly, the wording's not particularly going to go.
Right, Tracy, what kind of?
Oh, can I comment? It's so weird, I'm having to work hard.
You're gonna have to change seats so
I
that it
know.
feels more normal.
I know, I'll be good. I'm working hard. I just wanna go back to the work plan conversation that we had earlier, and say I personally don't object to a review of the roles and responsibilities of the various, officers of the organization, our trust administrators, president. I just wanna map it out within the scope of the total work plan, so would struggle with a motion that has a time frame, particularly as it's my understanding that there's a wish that our next meeting be dedicated overwhelmingly
Policy.
to, not to the policy, to the
Cost and quality.
cost and quality initiative, which to me means if we agree that that's our next priority, preemptively, before we even dive into the work plan, that it could be more than 45 days
All right.
before we start getting into this
All right, So
conversation.
if I understand it, you approve the concept but not the timeframe.
That's right.
Okay.
That's my initial thought.
Right.
And if the concept, as I heard you, Joel, is, and I don't even know why it would have to be a motion, this could be in future, the board would like to see an articulation of the division of labor so that we're satisfied that the staff's efforts with respect to the corporation, VEHI, et cetera, are optimal.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I suppose make a motion, or we could just have it recorded in the minutes, we would request it.
I understand.
But I think that's the spirit of your thing.
Let me
Yeah.
react. That makes all sense, except in my universe.
Okay.
And in my universe, again, what I think is most important for the continued development of a organization characterized by equality, I'm very interested within a limited period of time in seeing what roles we think collectively properly belong to a shared, I can't end that sentence grammatically. What roles should be shared equally by I guess, the VISBIT and Vermont NEA staff, as opposed to managed entirely by one or the other. That's like my primary interest. It's not in cutting into hierarchy, it's reestablishing equality of roles.
So we hear equality a lot, may I comment?
Yes.
I feel like our obligation is to make sure that this is a high-performing organization that delivers for all stakeholder groups, and that's our priority.
Well, and I would just, if I may, I should like to speak about it, I would support the concept for that reason, that the end of it, that the goal is to optimize the way things are being done for all the stakeholders.
I wouldn't make a proposal that I thought was counter to the interests of the organization. My firm belief after 25 years of direct and indirect association with this organization is that it functions most highly and always has functioned most highly when the roles of folks from VISBIT, essentially, more than school boards, the roles of VISBIT and Vermont NEA are shared top to bottom as they relate to the functioning of the Vermont NEA, of the VEHI board, as opposed to the corporation itself. Yes, ma'am.
So, I came into this organization much after you did, Joel and Mark, so you guys have a longer history than I do, but I'm somebody who reads everything, and my predecessor was a pat rat, so I had a lot to read. Sometimes.
And you told me all of it.
Sometimes 7 or 8 versions of the same thing. But anyway, I've seen since VEHI started that the roles and responsibilities have changed, so it hasn't been stagnant, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think it's really important for this board to look at not just what has been the past, but to look at what's worked and not worked, because I think everybody could have a list of work and not work in the past.
Absolutely.
And think about how to work in the future, regardless of whether it's the same or different from the past. And I think that the best place to start, and I said this to Joel, is Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I, because we live it. You don't even really know what we do. In fact, the 3 of us don't even really know what each of us do, because we each control our own calendar. We know when we're together, and we know some of the apart, but we don't know all of it. We meet weekly, we've been meeting weekly for 10 months maybe. And we always run out of time before we run out of stuff to do. And we're trying very hard to both support you, to evolve ourselves, and to get into lead in the work, which is why we want time at your next meeting. I feel it would be really challenging to give you something really well thought out. I couldn't give you a specific time frame. But I think that we could, we may have to double the amount of time that we meet more often, but I think that we will work on it and bring you something in the next couple of months. even if it's a skeleton that we feel, you know, sort of, we at least should report to you within 2 months about where we are, and you should expect that we've made progress, even if we haven't gotten quite as far as we'd like. Does that seem like a
Can I
reasonable
ask
thing,
you
Mark?
to react?
Yeah, I think between the three of us, because of the work relationship we have, and that's still evolving, and the fact that we do meet weekly, I think we can probably get this mission accomplished in 2 months' time. And I think the idea of the three of us sitting down with the guidance that we've been given here and identifying how we can restore equality in roles here is something the three of us can take on and get done. And I think we can do it in 2 months.
And I would say too that we have to do this anyway because Bobby Joe has joined us full-time just a couple months ago.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, to me, it's not about equality, it's about optimizing the work. I mean, to do things in triplicate sometimes is necessary and sometimes is a waste of time. I didn't hire Bobby Joe so that she and I could do everything the same, that's ridiculous. It was so that I could not do some things.
Correct, let me be a little clearer and I guess a little blunter. I wanna make sure that aspects of the work of VEHI that are perceived by Vermont NEA to have been managed unilaterally are not in the future. And so I don't personally wanna see that dynamic extend into the future from this day forward, frankly. So to the extent that there is any disagreement among the three of you, or particularly between Mark and either one or both of you, I'd like to be apprised of it. And I don't know that I have no authority beyond bringing it to the board, but I would like to be apprised of it.
I would hope that it would come to the board,
Of
not
course.
just you.
That will-
Okay.
Well, I would like to be apprised of it, so in order to, but that's fine if we wanna, I don't want the staff to be necessarily communicating with the full board for fear of responses and all the
I
rest.
think we do it in a meeting.
Mhm.
We could bring you something in a meeting.
So can I ask for clarification? Are we talking about an analysis of the roles and responsibilities of people now that we can then discuss? Or are we talking about an analysis of the roles and responsibilities now plus a proposal for something else?
Mine
I'm
is
hearing a
some-
proposal from you and I heard from Laura. I'm just
I understand,
confused.
I don't think we've resolved this yet. I believe that there are lists of roles and responsibilities in existence.
Mhm.
They're subject to change annually or monthly, depending on the organization. What I wanna see is on which side of
Safe travels?
travel. What I would like to see is a delineation of those roles that either, that any of you three think should be, that the line, where the line drawing should be changed. And I don't mean lines connecting, I mean lines dividing. Is there a place where Mark is doing something on his own that he shouldn't be, or Laura is doing something on her own that, let me be a little more precise. That's something that Mark is doing that Laura believes she ought to be involved in, and things that Laura is doing, I'll leave you out of this equation for the moment, that Laura is doing on her own, that Mark believes he should be sharing. And so that, it's not so much an analysis of the roles and responsibilities as to make sure that both, well, Visbit and Vermont NEA in this context are sharing, have an agreed division of labor.
So I think, to me, the service agreements is where you as a board need to outline what you want from Visbit and Vermont NEA. And that also is your opportunity to frankly decide, is something missing, do you wanna hire something else? Are we still the right organizations to staff, right? I mean, that's your prerogative. They're both up for renewal. I can tell you that, you know, the conversation started between VEHI and Visbit about wanting, changes to the service agreement. I'm not sure how much time is, you know, you have, but that's something that needs to talk about. When it comes to the service agreement, I can't have a voice because I can't represent either organization, because I have a conflict there. So it's the chair of the Visbit board and the chair of the VEHI board, or co-chairs of the VEHI board, that need to really get into the conversation there. And I think that there's a bigger, longer conversation that's probably not gonna happen in a couple of months about what you as a board need, since you don't have your own employees, although maybe you want to, I mean, maybe you reconsider that model, right? About what structure works for you to get your organization's work done. I think that's gotta be in your work plan, it's a longer conversation.
Absolutely.
I think we can start that by internally looking at our roles and our responsibilities and bringing you a report of how we plan to work together until and unless you do something, direct us differently. And to the degree that we have disagreement, we need to surface those and bring them to you.
That's-
Because if we can't solve them ourselves, you're the group that should make the decision.
Done. Any,
I absolutely concur.
any responses? Yes, sir.
Well, this is a lead into something which I'd hope to talk about at some point, not today, but and I agree with everything I heard, but at some point, I, as a new person, would like to hear from the other 5 of you and from the 3 of you, what does success look like here? I mean, I've been looking at the mission and like, what does the promised land look like? And I had up here, in fact, like, let me just say, the greatest, I think, communication I'll project it in a moment, about mission accomplished. Here it is. This is May 7th, 1945, a one-sentence telegram from Dwight Eisenhower to President Truman. When the Germans signed the surrender, I tell my students, this is the greatest communication in human history. And all the general said is, the mission of this Allied force was fulfilled at 0241 local time, May 7, 1945, boom. And you think of all the sacrifice and all the heroism and all the work that went into that, and he summarized it with one line. What was the promised land? The unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. So I'm not using the metaphors here, that always blows up a conversation. I'm merely saying, I'm very curious.
Look at the megalomaniac, you.
What was your statement for you?
No, but seriously, I'm saying, when you say, Joel, for example, that maybe Mark should do this versus, Bobby Joe should do that, that should means you have an idea of what success looks like here, and not tonight, but I really would like to know
That's a fair point.
what that means.
I think your point actually really is fair, and it's something the 3 of us will need to keep in mind as we enter into this conversation. But I also think, because we've been doing this a long time, there will be areas for us that will be very easy to talk about because of the nature of the work and the nature of our relationship. In respect to the delineation of roles that will require some changes, I also don't think that is going to be a terribly difficult conversation. I think we're going to be able to identify where there are problems, and I'm confident that the 3 of us are going to be able to find our way to a compromise solution or a consensus. And if we can't, obviously we will come to the board for that.
I guess I'll suggest that at a minimum, even if there's nothing to report, that we have
Updated in 2 meetings.
a standing agenda item for a while.
Sure.
Except for the next meeting, which is dedicated.
Yeah.
Tracy?
And I just want to say I agree with entrusting the trust administrators to begin to frame those conversations, and want to link it again to Robert's remarks about, and we really need to talk about the work plan, and I think one of the first things we ought to revisit, and this was part of the former Elizabeth's parting gifts to us, and it wasn't even a parting gift, it's been a persistent request of hers over the course of a year, that we spend some dedicated time revisiting our mission into that and take it a step further and say, what is success? How do we know if we are delivering on the mission, and what gets us to the telegram? And I think that's an important initial piece of work that many of our other decisions flow from, including how our officers do their work.
Just very quickly, so why I said that is, I know you've mentioned equality tonight, and that it could be one metric, but that's not the only metric. If we are inept, if we're not serving the members, but we're doing it equally, that's not a success.
Correct.
So,
But it can't be done
I agree.
unequally.
well, yeah, and you did say that you felt performance is optimized if there's equality, but I'm saying that in and of itself can't be the only.
The goal, the
only
only
goal.
mission.
We could be completely but equally incompetent in how we approach this. sufficient. 'Cause
And Robert, I'll add one more thing, I think the work that we're gonna start a conversation about at the next meeting that Laura alluded to, I think that conversation and what we'll be sharing with you could very well be foundational to the longer term goal of looking at the mission, defining success, who we serve and why, and where we wanna be as an organization down the road.
all that being said, there's nothing formal will result from this other than, I
We'll
guess
get to work.
the minutes probably should reflect.
So that you talked about a proposal, a conversation was led by Joel, consensus was reached that we wanna optimize the roles and responsibility towards the accomplishment of the mission. And that, at a subsequent meeting and as a stand-in agenda item, we'll give you an update, something like that.
Yes, but.
I mean, that's a starting
If-
point.
If you don't want to acknowledge the concept of equality, then that's the board's prerogative. That was my purpose. It was not to challenge the manner otherwise in which the work of this organization has been done. It is about finding finding where in the work of the organization it should be done jointly by Vermont NEA and VISBIT, and the rest of it will go its merry way. So
But going to Peggy's strengths, looking at strengths, sometimes you don't divide equally because you go to people's strengths. Mark is really good at writing, we don't do equal writing. He always takes the brunt of it. Mark's gonna be better at certain things, we need to play that, Bobby Joe's better than certain things. So it's about, are we all together informed and comfortable that our voices are appropriately heard, that we're playing to our strengths? I think is the way you gotta come at it.
I know, I think the concept of equality is first, foremost, and unending until it's resolved.
For you.
So I would strongly recommend, without making it a motion, that you include the reference to equality of roles where it is appropriate, and so that we don't duck that fundamental issue. Again, I want to say, I think the functioning that you three provide is probably second to none nationally when it comes to organizations, even remotely like this. But there are aspects of the work in which shared decision-making is a prerequisite for a satisfied constituency on both sides of the equation.
I look forward to discussing that as a board.
Good. Okay. We now have to appoint a president and a secretary. I'm not quite sure how it's ever been done, Laura. I'll yield to you as the president currently.
So VISBIT's always given the president, it was John Bettman, then it was Joe Zimmer, and then it was me. Martha's been secretary for a while. I will say that we have not, I believe we have not acted on anything unless there was a request to do so, because the way the bylaws are written is what's appointed, they serve until
I see.
there's another action.
I see.
So we've only acted on president when John retired, it became Joe, when Joe retired, it became me. When somebody, I forget, Joe was secretary, I was secretary, anyway, then it was Martha, only when a reason to. That doesn't mean you can't do something today, but you may wanna table it until you have more information, you may wanna act, you may wanna reaffirm, I don't know what you wanna do.
I want to point out my own logical failing here. I assumed, without reading carefully enough, that the corporate officers have to be elected annually, and that is not what the bylaws say. It says the officers of the corporation shall be appointed by the directors, and that's essentially all it says. So, in the absence of, in the presence of the discussion we just had, but in the absence of a motion to the contrary, I think we can move on. All right, now, in the remaining 120 minutes, between now and 6 o'clock.
It's 45 minutes.
45 minutes.
He was
Yeah.
telling you.
Oh, I get it,
You're either gonna get used to it,
Beforehand.
you're either gonna get, Laura, you're either gonna get used to it, or the minutes are gonna be all screwed up.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I was gonna say, but the minutes reflect that the chair has a numerous.
All right,
Joel, maybe perhaps a suggestion, if we turn the page, we have 15 minutes to close the meeting, we have 15 minutes for management
Right.
updates, would you
Right.
like?
We
So
do
we don't
need
have-
15
have-
minutes for management
Alright, so
updates,
what
yeah.
I wanna
And so
suggest-
with an extra 15.
What I wanna suggest is that we have 15 minutes only
Yeah.
on this 120-minute item. And to be blunt, unless there's a reason to go in the order it's presented, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the conflict of interest issue. It's a discrete discussion, and it shouldn't take more than 15 minutes just to have the discussion without any particular action associated with it. So is there any objection to doing that?
We're not talking about action?
Correct.
Just
So
discussion.
We're packing 120 minutes into 15, which is wonderful.
We can do it,
Which is
as long
wonderful.
as we do it together.
In my line of work, a typical higher education meeting is 10 minutes of information packed into 2 hours.
No,
So,
I don't-
you're-
Laura, I don't think you included that one page.
Okay,
Every-
it's on the very last page of what I copied. So, and it is in, you reordered, or, yes, it was.
Right.
And what I copied for you today, I did add it in.
No, no, no.
No,
This was a document that Joel sent within the last week.
It looks like,
This is
Here, it looks
January
like this.
2019
it
on the
must- it
top.
must look like this too.
Yes.
It's 2-page?
I have 2
Two
copies.
pages, right?
Yeah.
If somebody wants one of my copies.
Conflict of interest basics, Joel D. Cook, January 2019, has a little box at the top.
Yes.
Everybody got it?
You didn't include the second page?
Yeah,
Is there a two-page? Is that?
Mine.
yeah, the way that it
I'll-
copied, it's there, it should be on the back of something else.
It's all right. It's all right. Yeah, somebody else.
All right, sorry.
Okay,
You can tell.
so I don't need to dominate this discussion. I think it's, I've been in and out in issues associated with conflict of interest related matters for 43 years. And the beginning and the end is this. So many of us, when we hear the word conflict of interest, we shrink back in, not horror, but wonder about what am I doing wrong. There is nothing wrong with having a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest is a heading, not an accusation. Fundamentally, that should make everybody relax a little bit on that issue. It's an important issue, but it's not an accusation. And so, I describe the purposes of the policies around the issue as having 2 things, as being 2. One is to actually get people to think carefully about how their personal and professional lives overlap, interact, or affect their role as a member of the VEHI board. And then, to the policy will provide, how do you proceed if there is a conflict of interest, and that's what this is all about. When Laura and I got together, I think we agreed that the bylaws control. The definition of the conflict of interest issue in the bylaws is what should be guiding us. And however it happened, neither the policy labeled conflict of interest nor the disclosure statement regarding conflict of interest at all mirrors the bylaws. And so for my money, those 2 documents need to change, not tonight, but they need to change. The bylaws definition speaks of a significant pecuniary interest. That word significant means something. I don't know what it means, but it means something, and it can get played out. The bylaws say, the bylaws, unlike the policy, mention the pecuniary interest of a business associate. That has meaning, and we should talk that through sometime. And the bylaws say this, whereas the policy doesn't. You don't have a conflict of interest if what you're voting on will have an effect on basically other people, not in a manner just about the same as what you're experiencing. So the easiest example is a school board member who votes on a school budget knowing full well that that's going to have major implications on household income in the form of property taxes. Well, what are you going to do? The school board has the authority to vote to set the budget, and from that, the property tax emerges. That's not a conflict of interest because taxpayers generally are affected in the same way as board members are. All right. So those are differences between what our policy says and what our bylaws actually provide. And then I go through this very quickly, I won't repeat it here, but my own sort of take on, well, where do the potentials for conflict of interest lie in this room? And, well, they lie with dues-paying members of Vermont NEA, maybe, property taxpayers, all of us, and those of us, I think with the exclusion of the two old farts in the room. Sorry, you said you called yourself a new person before, and I almost jumped in, but
I'm a new board member.
everybody in this room, new board member, I think, without exception, except for Robert and me, obtains their health insurance through VEHI, I think. Well, that's got some potential financial impact on the lives of people. We set the plan. The plan has premium rates attached to it and out-of-pocket costs attached to it and so on. And so that's what I thought were the areas where we might be looking at. And school board members, and I had you two in mind just because you're the two administrators, Tracy and Martha, in the room. Well, you have a duty of loyalty owing to your school board, and your school board is a member of VSBA. And so we have to be careful not to allow our personal and professional lives to intrude overly into the work of this organization. I say overly because of the word significant and the other word pecuniary.
And the word human.
Hmm?
And the word human.
And that's it. That's right. Anyhow, so the bottom line for today is, in my mind, when we amend the disclosure statement, and I think we'll take a crack at it. Laura took an initial crack and I just didn't, because I didn't think we would be ready to deal with it tonight anyway. It'll call for a little bit more than the current one, which says, what contracts do you currently have or have you had that with somebody else that might present a conflict of interest? That question doesn't conform to the standard in the bylaws. Anyhow, I mean, I use a little more than 1/3 of the allotted time here for just to explain that. And so that second page is, I just sat there and I said, how would I fill out the form if I were in each of our roles? And how I fill it out is not the same as how you will fill it out. But I thought it was incumbent on me to at least try to translate into action what I asserted should be how we approach this issue. And I think what we'll probably do, in the absence of any objection, is put together a draft amendment to the statement as well as the policy presented at the next non-dedicated meeting, and but probably distribute it before then, and ask each of us simply to consider the implications for us. But again, having a conflict of interest it's common, but it's not as common as people would like to believe. And certainly having one is not an accusation of wrongdoing. It just sets in motion a process. Do I withdraw from considering something, or do I stand in front of my peers and say, I don't think this is a sufficient conflict for me to withdraw, and then the bylaws have a process that we can take that discussion.
Go ahead, no, please.
Madam Judge.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
Pick one.
No, I would cut it off, go ahead.
Tracy.
I too would like to have a deep discussion of conflict of interest. I would appreciate the opportunity for the board to look at the bylaws, the policy, and the statement side by side and do that work together and have the conversations together rather than have a draft developed by one person. And that preference comes in part from my conversations with Peggy and about my feeling that this is not just an administrative task, this is an educational task. And those that do the work, do the learning, and I think the board needs to have the opportunity to grapple with these issues thoughtfully together so that we can move forward positively, because I know it's something people have strong feelings
Far
about.
be it for me to suggest that we not approach something thoughtfully, I agree.
I didn't mean to imply
I know,
that.
but you did, and I, but you did imply it.
I didn't mean that. I just meant
And I understand what you
everybody's
did.
thoughts, not just,
Nevertheless, but my
Designate.
point is this. To the extent that you're interested, of course, we can do it that way. But I will tell you, it gets confusing very quickly, because the bylaws say what the law is for us. The policy doesn't come close to saying what the bylaws say. And the disclosure statement doesn't even follow directly from the policy. So we can go through a long process, but I want you all to know that the experience I had was it takes time. The easiest thing to do is to say, of course, our policy and any behavior stemming from our policy should conform to the bylaws. So the notion was, nobody's stopping anybody from looking at the others, and we can distribute all three, although I think you all have them. And you can do your own homework as you wish, but I don't think the assignment includes necessarily understanding all three. What's important is to understand that all three have to be consistent with the bylaws. We can do that.
Robert wants.
I think, as the oldest person with the least experience on the board, I appreciate what you're saying about there has to be some consistency. As a general rule, I'd be concerned if policies are discrepant from the bylaws, it could create confusion. And I appreciate what you said, that a conflict of interest is not an accusation. I got a charge out of whoever put this out, I'm a former member of the Chipton School Board Director. I mean, I'm being recorded, I'll be careful here. If I could vote on something that would cut my property taxes in half, I would do it in a heartbeat. But your point is well taken. I just add another level to when we get to this, and it's a little bit, I used to be in banking, I was an expert finance insurance. The least effective thing you could say to someone who's worried is don't worry.
Don't worry, of course.
So the thing with conflict of interest, we can agree on a policy, be consistent with the bylaws, and say we're okay. But like any organization, it's, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and it's what other people might perceive. So if there are things going on that we might say, we can say we're fine, and you say, and I'm not suggesting we hire legal counsel, because we get into this issue, who is this legal counsel, who is this one, as you pointed out, you can run around in circles on that. I couldn't help but notice, I downloaded the annual report of the Ethics Commission, State Ethics Commission, must say that 2018, and I see they offer opinions if asked by public bodies. If we had something, we can talk and meet endlessly and say we're fine. If there's something that others could, the issue here is what others perceive and not what we perceive. And I don't know how to inure us against that. So I would merely suggest when we get to that conversation, if there's something that we feel could potentially be perceived by others outside this board in this room, then maybe we want to get a ruling from them. That is all we can do. And if people think what they think, we don't exercise thought control.
That is in fact what existing policy bylaws call for, essentially. If there's a perceived conflict of interest, that sounds like it's even more sinister than actually having a conflict of interest and acknowledging it. One of the basic purposes of having a useful disclosure statement is to be able to return to it after thoughtfully filling out and say, here's what I had to say about this. This is my reasoning. As a parent, a conflict of interest, as you may think I have, I've thought this through, and I've concluded that I really don't have one. And it's up to the board to decide what to do about that, and the board can say, I forget what the bylaws actually provide, but there's a process in the bylaws through which the board has its say about whether one of us has a conflict of interest.
But I was alluding to, Joel, respectfully, not what we say, but what other stakeholders out there, either the legislature, in the general public, our members, that is an uncontrollable. I realize you can't disprove a negative, but if there was
That
something,
was my next line.
that if there was something that is particularly contentious, maybe it would come to that. We say, look, all we can do is refer it here, and we'll stand by whatever they say. And I don't know what that issue would be, but
Well, anyhow, I mean, with all, well, with respect to all of us, I think we should probably move on. What I think we'll do is make a point of sending all three documents, all three definitions, if they are that, to you all, and probably along with the proposals that would change them from, before I was chair, from my standpoint. Is that all right?
And then they'd be discussed here.
Of course, you know, that's right. There's no obligation to complete this form other than that we do it annually sometime. And this feels to me like a better approach than simply distributing a form that doesn't conform with the policy, which lists the bylaws, and have people fill it out and say, we're done with it. Okay? Because I'm not very organized tonight.
Management
I lost
updates?
my
Management
update.
update.
Yeah,
I have a couple things and then I'm gonna have Kip mark the bigger chunk.
He might be, yes.
So, our rates are still with DFR for the health program. We have been told that they have made a decision to approve the active rates as filed, but they have not formally given us the decision. They also made a decision to not allow any use of reserves towards the Vistor's rates, and there's a backstory that we can fill you in offline. Mark can let,
You know what Visitors means?
so that's the state teachers retirement system. We also set rates for those,
It's our
and they're
largest
different
member,
because
right?
they have different plans. And the Visitors had asked if we would agree to use $1.25 million of our reserves to help lower their rates. We did file that, the board agreed to it, the prior board, DFR did not allow it. Visitors understands that, and they just met yesterday as a board, and they will let the rates just stay with DFR as filed without the reserves. They don't want to amend it, so we don't need any authorization from you to do anything. I expect any day that we will get the official,
We stopped holding our breath.
yeah, here are your rates. I'm not gonna tell you before we tell the field, because I'm telling you now. You'll see a campaign monitor that Mark and Bobby Joe will send out that they've already drafted, that they'll coordinate the timing on, that will let people know. No one really cares at this point, frankly, because people aren't paying attention yet. Subscribers and business managers have already built their budgets, but we'll confirm what we've already told them. So that should be the end of that cycle. We have financials, they were given under separate cover, but they were copied for those of you today. Chris did a memo that I think explains it. I think this should be our absolutely worst financial position of the entire year for our health program. If not, we have some serious issues. But we are into January now where we will not pay for most claims for a while as people meet their deductibles. Then we'll start with co-insurance, but most of our members are in the Gold CDHP plan. So we expect to see our financials start to go in the positive direction. But before investment income, we are down $10.4 million at this point in the program. We go up a little because of investment, but you can't count on that because investment's all over the place. So, but somewhere around $10 million is where we are right now. We hope to end the year around $6.8 million in the negative towards our reserves. We knew we would be low, we'll see. So don't panic, but keep aware that the next financial statement, and really the second, March financial statement will really be an indicator, because the next financial statement will still tell us a lot about what happened in January, and a lot about what happens in January is you pay December claims.
Right.
You with me? So we get a little bit more lag before we really see if we've turned the corner.
Do we need to take action to accept that financial report? Sometimes we have and sometimes we haven't.
Never.
And
I don't feel like you
Never
need
have
to.
to.
We did last time, we did it the
We
last
do.
time.
I don't think you need to.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, to make sure that And I know it's something DFR mentioned in the audit, that they liked that we were paying closer attention to financial.
Well, they'll see it's on the agenda that you've reviewed.
Okay,
We, you know, if you wanna talk to Chris Roberts, who puts the financial statements together, and ask her questions, she's happy to do that. We'll get more into it as we get into a more normal cycle, so that's sort of the financial update. The rate update. We do have, a meeting that Mark will talk about, that we wanna talk about, a big initiative, but we also are starting to have other things that we're gonna need you to act on in the next few months as you look at meeting dates. We've got a contract with Blue Cross, we've got a contract with Visitors. We do need to look at the net position policy, we at least need to get a draft in front of the board so DFR knows you're not ignoring their issue, even if you're not ready to adopt it for a while. So we are gonna need to start to have some management time more and more in the next few months. Finally, before I turn it over to Mark, 2 bills in the legislature that have been introduced, just want you to be aware of, and we may send you emails throughout the legislative session if there's something we feel like without you taking a position, we don't have any comments to make on these bills, but we want you aware of them, and you need to think about if you ever do want a position that either you ask us to speak on or your co-chairs or somebody. So one bill is S21, it's being introduced tomorrow in GovOps. It creates a public employee health pool and would close VEHI December 31st, 2021. And it doesn't explicitly say it would close VEHI, but it would, because it would put all school employees, state employees, municipal employees, and university employees in one health pool that's governed by the state.
Probably the 7th time this.
Yes, so it's a perennial, it's a perennial.
Yeah, it comes around
It
every
doesn't seem to be a bill that's gonna get traction,
But it's there.
but it's there, so we're just telling you that.
You know who the lead sponsor?
Jeanette White, who's the only sponsor, she's got no one else.
is?
Okay, but you never know how these things
They'll
go,
be-
so I'm
they'll be
just giving you a
hearings.
heads up.
Yeah.
At this point, it seems like it's a perennial.
With her, it's a constant.
The other,
It doesn't come back, it's constant.
the other is S41, it actually has multiple sponsors, and I understand that the Vermont NEA helped to find sponsors. It's to have regulations for TPAs that do HSAs and HRAs.
That won't be
And
hard to take a
FSAs.
position.
So it's S41 if you wanna take a look at it. It mostly directs the Department of Financial Regulation to create rules and have licensing and various things. I don't see the need for you to necessarily take a position. I wanted you to know it was there. The union can, I don't know if any of you really speak for the union in this, but I
We
just,
will probably be called on to comment on
the union or,
it. No, for
VEHI.
VEHI.
okay, so right now we wouldn't have a, so I would feel like we would have to say we don't have a position, so you might wanna think about
We could
that.
describe experience. I assume, I don't know what Vermont NEA's plan is with this bill, other than I've gotta believe they want it because of what the last year has been like, but anyhow, I mean,
I think- yeah.
VEHI is likely going to be asked for its view, and its view can be, we don't
So-
have a
so you
formal
may-
position, but here's our experience.
So Mark and Bobby Joe are the 2 best qualified to talk about the experience, because
Right.
frankly, that's an area that they are better qualified than
So
me.
you adopt that one.
So I wouldn't, I'm a very smart woman, Joel. I wouldn't,
Sometimes we drag her in a meeting.
I wouldn't be the right person to speak on it, frankly.
Understood.
For the experience.
But I don't know whether you want
Right.
to give them authority. I did wanna tell you that I think it would be a courtesy to give, for Bobby Joe, cause I think she has the best contact, to call up the 4 vendors that have school business right now and just tell them there's a bill. If you don't have any concerns with that.
I don't know.
We wouldn't necessarily normally do that, but we've been in a communication problem for a year and a half in this arena, and I would like the vendors to feel that VEHI is open and transparent. Not that we sponsored the bill, not that we have a position on the bill, but we wanted to make sure they were aware of the bill, period, that's it. So that they wouldn't be able to say, why didn't you guys at least tell
The
us?
3 of us talked about this at our weekly meeting, and I think I had the most reservations about it, only because A, we've never done it, it's not a role or a responsibility of VEHI.
Nothing in this arena that we've done has been a role of
No, but I meant in terms of reaching out to people and informing them of
Putting them on
legislation.
notice.
Right, and I was concerned about the precedent that might set, and I just didn't feel comfortable taking on that role.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Fred.
The vendors, are they health?
Health
Health
equity,
equity,
data path, healthy
CS1.
dollars, and CS1. They currently have school business.
there's another one in Addison.
Well, but are-
Oh, I did know that.
Given the industry that they are all in, don't they have their own sort of lobbyists and people who would keep track of?
Well, data path wouldn't, they wouldn't be following Vermont law.
Because they're in Arcus.
Yeah.
Arcus.
I mean, again, if it was a normal year,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be looking at this. It feels like because of the strange situation we're in of trying to assist resolution in this area, that it could cause a lack of trust for these entities. And they may already know, but I don't know.
Robert, then I wanna,
Then it's your call, that's why
I
we're
would
bringing it
think
up.
if we were to hold a press conference or issue a statement that was aggressively negative towards, or perceived as aggressively negative towards existing vendors, I could see that being a problem. But isn't our general position, although we're not taking one, that we're in favor of TPAs that run efficiently and serve our members properly?
Yes.
properly, yes.
Yeah.
But that's.
That won't be hard.
Right, so, yeah, I guess you can go either way, whether you wanna reach out to vendors or not, but it's not as if we're taking a position where you're gonna get an angry phone call, or someone would, to say, hey, I saw you on the news, how could you say that? Who could disagree with that general statement? It's not
It's known as being on the side of the angels.
it's a mom and apple pie statement, but
As long as
I,
it's the right motive. My reaction, and maybe it's because, well, it's not maybe, it's from the standpoint of somebody who spent a third of a century lobbying, is that providing notice like this may be perceived as taking a position. And so I would be hesitant to suggest that we do that. The reason I say it could be interpreted as taking a position is that it would set in motion consideration by these firms about taking a position, and which will be opposed to, we know that, and hiring, retaining lobbyists for it. I just don't see, I don't see the advantage to VEHI in weighing in until it has a position, if any.
I think the legislation in question too would effectively just authorize DFR to develop regulations, which then of course sets in motion rulemaking and the opportunity to testify. And all these TPAs will certainly have an opportunity to do so at that time, if they wish.
So Laura, that's what I think.
Right, I don't know if that's what the board thinks, or.
I know.
I think not taking, I mean, unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see if it gets legs before we can really take up a thorough discussion. I think not taking a position on it also has an implication of taking
But it
a
has a
position.
different quality.
I understand, I'm allowed to have my opinion. And I do respect Laura and Bobby Joe's advice, I respect yours too.
Thanks.
But I give special deference
year.
to Bobby Joe, as she is our liaison with these organizations, and do value our relationship with them, even though it is not, it's tangential and is not a VEHI chosen organization. We do work hard to make sure that they work well for us. Sometimes that's successful and sometimes that hasn't been, but I do hope that that relationship that our trust administrators and president have with these partners is honored. I know there have been situations in the past where we've made that kind of deference with other contracted service providers and had Mark do some advanced recon and friendly outreach as well, so that's enough for me.
Is there an issue of trust with these vendors? Because from my perspective, they're the ones that have dropped the ball and you guys have covered for them. So is there an issue of trust with them?
Here's the thing, let me respond to that first, Laura.
Well, can I hear from those guys though?
Huh?
Just, can I hear from those guys? Is there an issue?
Bobby
of
Joe would be
trust?
better to answer.
I think,
Okay.
from my perspective, I think Healthy Dollars and CS1 will probably learn on their own. Health Equity is very involved in legislatures nationwide, so I'm sure that they'll hear about it. data path, I found it a little bit more of a lighting a fire. I mean, that was my perspective of letting them know that this is how big of a deal it is in Vermont, is that it's now been brought to the legislature to move on this. So I was kind of hoping it'd be more of a lighting a fire under them than giving them the opportunity to hire a lobbyist. That was my take on it.
So trust isn't really an issue.
But there's so.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby, Joe and I, and this is actually part of a management update, so we might as well just roll into it. We are now having weekly meetings on the telephone with these people. I don't know how many emails the two of us have sent to them over the course of the last 8 to 10 months, but it's just overwhelming, right, in terms of numbers and time devoted to it. And we're still dealing, both of us, with individuals, and in some cases for Bobby Joe's central offices that are looking for resolution to their accounts. So I personally like the people at DataPath.
Sure.
If they were in the room, you would like them.
Sure.
They're not easy to dislike.
Yeah.
But they are unfortunately easy not to trust sometimes. Not, I think, because they are deliberately being deceptive, but because they got in over their heads too. And they have had to dig out of a very big hole, and I think they have not always made the most appropriate corporate decisions. So I like them,
Yeah.
right? And they are working very hard with us right now to try to get to the end of this road. But I don't feel any obligation to notify them of what's happening in the legislature. I do have an obligation, and this is where Bobby Joe and I have been very pointed, to let them know whenever someone or some entity is having a problem that they need to resolve. They are really nice people who I think are trying to do their very best to get out of this situation.
I think it's more overcommit.
Yeah, it's overcommitment. I think they're understaffed in times, they're overcommitted, and I think they took on a complexity of an issue that was beyond their capacity sometimes to handle.
And believe me, I don't need to fall on my sword for this, but here's the trust issue for me, and I'll just say it and then you do whatever you want, which seems like we won't notify them, which again, I won't lose any sleep over. I like to model what you want to see. Feels to me that DataPath hasn't always been forthcoming because they're like afraid to admit what's really happening, or they hope they can figure it out before it really has to be said. I just feel like you want to model what you want from them. So by not telling them, it seems like we're kind of doing this, I'm not really going to tell you everything I know, and that just feels, personally, it's my thing is you model what you want to be. So, but again.
Thank you for sharing.
From the other side of that, we know that, I'm assuming that we know this, that Vermont VA is foursquare behind this effort. We can surmise that if the School Board Association takes an interest in it, that based on the last year's experience, it too will be supportive of it. Why would VEHI, with representatives from both organizations, go out of its way, for good reasons, to inform the objects of this legislation that it's coming down the road, when that might instigate on their part oppositional behavior to it?
Or it might make it better.
Because
Well,
Bobby
but it
Joe,
might not, and the question of trust in this room is about VSBA and Vermont NEA, first and foremost. It's good to maintain good relations with outside vendors and the rest, obviously, for human purposes and every other purpose. But I don't see, in this instance, without more, I don't see the value to either VSBA, Vermont NEA, or VEHI.
well, I personally would defer to Bobby Joe's recommendation as the liaison with DataPath.
Please understand that I work very closely with
Okay,
DataPath.
I apologize. As an incentive for them to take seriously the need to improve.
Believe me, they know of our concerns.
Yeah.
That we have not been,
Okay.
we have not been shy or equivocal.
Just saying my opinion.
Mark,
I know what you're
hate to do
thinking.
this, but, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay.
No, well, I guess the last thing is that what we've already said, we
I
want.
want to point out,
meeting
we're
time.
gonna stay as long as it takes to get meetings scheduled, folks, because we're never in the room long enough.
So
to
did
do
you
it.
want to talk anything about the cost and quality of the queue and up?
Yeah, just quickly, because we're running out of time and the weather's getting lovelier as we speak.
Gary Sadowski knows what he's talking about.
He does, smart guy. Maybe he can tell us where healthcare's going to. have alluded twice, I think today, and at I think our last meeting, that we have been working closely together, the three of us, and also with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, to set in motion what we'll call shorthand, a cost and quality initiative. That is, I think, as I said earlier, going to lay a foundation also for this organization to look differently and harder perhaps at what it is, what it does, its mission, et cetera. And this cost and quality initiative, which we are going to be undertaking with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, will involve a very substantial analysis of our current claims, and actually claims going back probably 3 years, so that we can begin to identify where we believe we have issues with cost and quality, that in turn can lead to us taking initiatives that can be anywhere from education and membership in school districts to new benefit designs, to allow us to begin trying to get more control over costs, and also ensure that our school employees are getting the finest quality care they can from the very best sources. And that analysis, we hope, will begin in roughly a month, maybe a little sooner than that.
Yeah.
Depending on when we can work out all the contractual deals and get Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont and everybody on the same page. But it is definitely going to happen, and we're really excited about it. We've spent a lot of time on it, and we want to take the next meeting to really begin exploring with you in detail what this really means. Keep alluding to it, to all these teasers, but we want to actually now get into the details with you. And in anticipation of that meeting and the conversation to come, we'll be sending you a document that we're composing. We're almost near the end. It's draft 10. And it will be going out to you in advance of the next meeting. So you have an opportunity to read it and think about it and come prepared to talk and ask questions. And I think, as Laura said, I think we're going to look for a 3-hour time slot to really dive into this stuff and give you a chance to weigh in.
Okay? Okay. We have 15 minutes to set meetings. And this comes into that in more than a confession or bragging. But when you're retired in Vermont, you get to leave Vermont more frequently than when you're not retired.
Why did you want to go?
So I want you all to know what I know that Laura knows. I'm not going to be in state for 6 weeks of the next 3 months. So that will unfortunately be true, I suspect, into this process. And I will let you know immediately as we go through this what they are. But
Will you be available by email for
I can
agenda?
be available. I'm absolutely available for VEHI purposes. I just can't be present.
Physically, okay.
You can ask me where I'll be, and I'll be sort of sheepish about that. Okay.
Somewhere warm, I'm sure.
Oh, three different times, yeah. Laura, I'm sorry, both of you, when do you guys have in mind for the dedicated meeting to the reform issues?
So given that we'd like you to read what's gonna probably be an 8-page document before the meeting, and we haven't
1 page a
finished
day.
writing, I would think 3 to 4 weeks, towards the end of February.
I think that makes sense, actually. When are you back in February?
Well, if by the end of February you mean March 1st or 4th, that's fine.
Joel, are you in town in the middle of March, like the week of St. Patty's Day, like that week of 18?
No, I apologize. This is really terrible. I realize I hate being responsible, but it's the way it is. If you're married and want to stay that way.
What about the week of March 11th?
Well, I was thinking about, frankly, next week. Is there any, I don't mean for that meeting, I mean for the next meeting, and then we violate the agenda protocol. No, okay.
I'm overseas, I think I should have
All
a
right.
short-term
No,
teaching
no.
meeting Sunday.
All right.
It's just 3 days.
All right, so we're looking at the first week of March at the present time?
It looks that way.
Is the week of February 18th too soon?
I think Jill's going the 18th.
I'm out.
I'm gone the whole week too.
Oh,
That's
okay.
our
Thank
vacation
God I'm
week,
not
that's
away.
all.
And the week of the 25th, you're not back yet?
No, I'm in a different
And
place.
that's when I'm out, huh?
So October 4th and 5th, that's town meeting time,
March
right?
4th.
March
I'm like
4th.
October.
All right, March 4th, 5th is town meeting day.
Right, I won't be available yet.
How about March 4th?
March
So
4th,
it's be a
Monday?
town meeting.
Away. No, I have my organizational meeting. I could do
Right,
it
and
after
have
town meeting,
information.
Wednesday,
Okay,
Thursday,
that-
Friday.
that
Yeah, it
week-
has to be after town meeting.
Okay, the 6th?
6th work?
Conceivable, so are we saying like 2 to 5?
I have a school board.
2 to
meeting
5?
tonight, I can't be on,
Oh, the
I can't do
6th.
the sixth,
The sixth is an evening meeting?
yes.
Can we get you there on time?
I'd have to leave here by 4:30.
Can we do 1:30 to 4:30?
Or 1 to 4?
Or 1 to 4,
Well, it
yeah?
depends on the teachers.
Yeah, the teachers, I know, that's why I was throwing it
Well,
out as
let's-
a question.
I could be pretty close. I could.
All right, March sixth, 1 o'clock, close to 1 o'clock, whenever people get here, but the goal is 1 o'clock. And you leave when you gotta leave, and we'll schedule it no later than 4:30 to end, okay? All right, next, let's do 2 more, so I can be embarrassed some more. By saying no.
I wouldn't mind being embarrassed like that.
I know, yeah,
Sorry.
Bobby Joe, I'm really not all about it, but that's the truth out there.
So from our perspective, or at least from my perspective, that I think is ours, because we talk about it, but I don't wanna make Mark or Bobby Joe feel like they can't disagree with me. We're gonna also want time with you, well, in April, you have a request for a service agreement evaluation from the Vermont NEA, that's explicit in their contract, unless you decide to waive it together. You've expected it of ISBIT too, and we've produced it too, even though it's not in our contract as of yet. So you wanna think about service agreements, I would think you wanna meet in April on that. Again, we're gonna need you to act on
Can I
a
I'll
few
have
other
the balance of March, just because, could we meet a second time in March, the week of the 25th? I'm sorry,
You said you couldn't meet, oh,
no.
March
yeah, you could meet again in March, so I'm just trying
The
to.
last week in March, April's the worst for me, but.
You said you're
And you would need this information
Well,
for April, March.
Well, so I want,
Can
and
I
you might
get an
have,
answer to the question, is the last week in March,
It's bad for me.
it's bad? Okay, never mind, Laura, I yield.
I guess I want you to think that you need to have 2 tracks here. You need to have what you wanna do for your work, with your work plan that you haven't even built yet, right? And what we need from you. And besides that next meeting, we're gonna at least need one more chunk of time before people go for summer.
All right, well, let me tell you
Maybe 2
about,
chunks.
and let me just limit April for us. I can meet the 1st and the 2nd, and I can meet the 29th and the 30th.
First or second is.
First and second work for me.
First is a little better for me,
Pick
it's
one.
April Fool's, bad day for a board meeting.
Both nights,
Both nights,
Well,
you
what
said?
time? I mean, again,
5 and 6.
If we did 1 to 4,
Can
we do it.
can we meet on the day you meet at 6?
Nope, because I have a 3 o'clock.
April 2nd in the afternoon, I have a board meeting
Well,
for my
is
other.
the 1st still available at all?
No, you said
Those
no.
2 dates are out there.
What else do you have in April?
The last 2 days, Monday the 29th or the 30th. Then I'll be home much of the next several months.
So I can do either of those dates.
Which of those, April 29 or?
Or April 30th.
Except the 29th is my birthday.
Same,
Happy birthday.
Is it really?
yes.
You guys share a birthday.
So what do we decide?
April 29th?
The afternoon, is it the afternoon?
What time do you wanna meet?
Well,
You wanna do 1 to, is 1 to 4 still work?
it's still-
Teachers, you okay with that?
Two's better.
2 is better?
But if you have meetings, I can make the 1, it just means I've gotta leave another class.
Let's do 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Two to
So we're
five?
doing
On the
one on
29th?
March 6th because of Martha, but in April
Right.
we'll do 2 to 6.
Whoa,
Okay,
okay.
that'd be-
So say this again, April
April
29
29th, 2 o'clock.
till 5?
To 6.
Do we need 4 hours?
April 29, maybe.
I think we'll probably do it for,
Is it 4 hours?
So that's what it was today.
yeah, I'm pretty sure after this initial stush,
Yeah.
we can stream.
We can keep the hour on the agenda perhaps?
I was
if
gonna
we
say,
we
if you
need
don't
that.
need it, we won't use it, then
Right.
block your
Maybe
schedule.
we'll try to get out of here in 3, if we think we need
Yes.
more time, we can just keep it
Okay,
reserved.
so to help me
April
with the
29th, 2 o'clock,
It's
right?
2.
Start at 2 on the 29th.
All right, so the 2 dates are March 6th from 1 o'clock to about 4:30, and April 29th from 2 o'clock until forever. Or
Wow.
4, or 6
Till I go for
o'clock.
the wine.
Or
then.
6
Yeah.
o'clock.
That's it's their birthday, they have to have dinner and stuff.
And, you wanna do another one or not? Since we're
I-
here.
I don't think I can go out any further than that, because I've got, the issue with me is we're in the process of data software conversion, and so I'm not even sure I'm gonna be able to make these 2 meetings because of part finally, but.
You're in the first round?
Well, okay, but when will you know more about your May potential?
Probably in April. Sorry.
All
The
right.
state is mandating we move to a new software program and they have given us a very short time
So
frame to
what
do it.
what if I were to suggest that we each of us try to leave open as much of the week of May 6th as possible? And see if we can't, as we get nearer that time, make that work.
I'm not gonna be able to do the 9th in the afternoon.
Well, just as much of
Yeah.
that week as possible, then, you know, if it all goes to hell, it'll all go to hell again. But we have
So we're tentatively holding as much time as we can the week of May 6th.
to- Right,
Why, when we just met on April 29th?
Yeah, well,
because we will not have finished what we need to do,
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
It's hard,
May,
as an administrator, it's hard for me when my boards have a meeting
Yeah.
3 to 5 days
I
after the
understand.
one I just
And
had.
we will be varying from the agenda protocol.
May 6th, is that what we said?
We'll look,
The week of.
We'll look at
The
that.
week of May
It's-
6th, as much time as you can reserve.
yeah, it's, okay, so last week, so I just have to check presentations, with the students.
But that's a possible week.
It's possible, yeah, I'm
That's
saying
what it's
something.
All right, we'll have to, of course, conform to people's reality. I'm not in a position, at least with this meeting, to suggest otherwise, so. Yeah. If you wanna meet in, different places in Florida, let me know.
From each
I'll tell you what,
if you guys pay travel costs.
I know, Milo, I think that's above budget.
I don't know, now we're up the chair. All right, anyhow, Peggy.
I'm just gonna make a recommendation, throw it out there. Have we thought about timekeepers? In terms of, moving the agendas and, so we don't get bogged down. We've just used it a lot at our meetings and it might be, the
Maybe an
administrator
o'clock?
can do it, or.
I want you to know this,
There's one behind us, but-
tried that with me.
Right,
It didn't work.
He still remembers.
But this is a public body, so for me,
Just a thought.
with formal actions.
I make a motion to adjourn. I second earlier.
Well, we didn't finish everything, but we came close.
Pretty good.
A lot of work done
And we
today.
got a lot
Thank you all.
done, and I
Thank
appreciate,
you.
appreciate the spirit of compromise that you emerged in this meeting.
So Joe, the walk for you from the park road won't be too bad, I'll have my, it'll warm up.
I think they have a shovel for you to use for the. Thank you all. I think we've adjourned without saying so.
I'm over you. Right, seconded.